Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I hope everyone is doing well, and welcome anybody who's new. This is a special show. It's my first interview show, which is really exciting. And it's with my friend from Streaming Truth, and it's going to be really interesting. We're going to get into a lot of stuff, so let's do this. Hey, Afshin, how are you?
Hey Megan, how are you doing?
Good. I'm so glad you're doing this show with me. I'm so
Yeah,
excited to get into this topic with you.
thank you. Yeah, I'm excited. There's a lot to talk about, like you said, so many different topics.
Yeah, and so I actually called you the other day because I was just having a lot on my mind with all the craziness that's going on in the world. And one of them was this whole Zionist topic thing. There's a lot of people bringing up the word Zionist in negative ways and then in not negative ways, and then in some really confusing ways.
Yeah,
And so my thought about Zionism was that it was a really complicated thing that involved like politics and theology. And in my mind, people actually had different definitions for it. Like it meant something different to different people.
yeah,
And so that's why I contacted you the other day to ask you about it because I trust you. We have talked a lot about biblical stuff together, and I know you to be very strong in biblical knowledge and a reasonable, level-headed person. So I
well, thank
actually
you.
called you to talk about that. I asked you what Zionism was. So if you would like to explain that.
Yeah, I mean that's a huge question just right off the bat, honestly. It is a really complicated topic in a lot of ways because a lot of people define it in different ways, like you said. And then the way that I look at it is it's not only a political question, but it's also a religious question. So it depends. Like if we're talking about Zionism, I can talk about Zionism as a political movement, or I can talk about it as a spiritual movement from a Christian perspective, or from a Jewish perspective to some degree. Because obviously I'm not Jewish, but just knowing some of the history of that. But it's a huge question. There's huge conspiracies around it. As I think a lot of people know nowadays, there's like Zionism, anti-Zionism. Like, what are we actually talking about? So there's just so many angles of it that we could, kick off into, including looking at verses like Galatians 3 to talk about some of the spiritual or religious components versus politically, like, are we for Israel as a nation? Or, or a lot of people are not today, Israel's getting a bad rep. So there's a lot to dissect. I'd love to know where you want to kind of dive in
Well,
and
let's
get
go
into it.
with the just the traditional definition before we get into the religious aspect of it because I actually have this board here. So I looked it up and it said this is just the first definition that popped up. All these boards that I have are just the first definition of things. So
Yeah.
rather than like going through and trying to figure out which definition to pick, I just picked the first one that popped up. So this
Right.
one says that Zionism is defined as an ethno-cultural nationalist movement that emerged in the late 19th century Europe with the primary goal of establishing and supporting a Jewish homeland or state in the historical region of Palestine, modern day Israel. What do you think
E-
about that?
Exactly. I mean, that's the historical, you could say, political, establishment of the movement of Zionism. Now, I'm not like by any means claiming to be an expert on Zionism, like the history, the politics of it. I come from it from more of a biblical standpoint. But then just also seeing what is happening in our culture and the political debate around Zionism and let's say even like alt-right conspiracies uh, that are saying, not that I'm for that, but the whole alt-right issue is another issue where you're getting a lot of anti-Zionist sentiment. People just hate Israel nowadays. A lot of people, not everybody, and that's where the big divide is. So again, it's such a loaded word, Zionism itself, because you have this historical definition that you read, which is true. It started as a movement, and then in 1948 it was codified, with the help of the Brits and the UN, and Israel became a nation. We can go into all of that, in terms of like eschatology and everything else too. There's just so many facets to this. It's like it's going to take a while to really, dissect it. But if you're looking at from the religious standpoint, we've got the political standpoint or the historic standpoint of the Jews wanting a homeland after all of that
Right.
persecution
I
in
did
Europe.
read that there was actually a Zionist movement before that of Christians that was called Restoration or something like that, way back in the day, that
Yeah,
had the eschatology that it was that there would one day be a an Israel would be back in the land because of what the Bible said. So there
right.
was sort of a movement that called itself Zionists, and it was something Zionism that
Yeah,
existed before this newer modern day form of it, if that
yeah,
makes sense.
yeah. I mean, that's very much true, I believe. I mean, that gets into the whole like dispensational view of Israel is going to be restored as a nation. They believe that happened or began in 1948. But then before that, you had a movement of Jews that simply wanted to go back to their homeland. But then I'm sure there's also the philosophy or the theology that went behind that as well from the founders, of Zionism, which I actually love to read a lot more about that and kind of get more knowledgeable on that. But that's more of the historical, spiritual standpoint of
Well,
it.
I know that there was some hullabaloo around the interview that Tucker did with Mike Huckabee.
Yeah.
And you mentioned like the far right situation. So the far right is actually composed of like a huge group of people with lots
Yes.
of
True.
different ideas and stuff. And I actually out a lot in those spaces. And so there's like all kinds of stuff going on. And some of them are upset with Jewish people or the state of Israel for
Yeah.
various different reasons. And so they're not all the same. Now,
Exactly. Yeah. It's a
yeah,
very nuanced topic, even within these different groups. Groups within groups, factions within factions.
right. And so, but the conspiracy world side of it is all stemming from there's this really bad habit of when somebody falls into the conspiracy world and they start learning things that might not be true the way that they learn them, et cetera, et cetera. There's this whole subset inside there that people tend to fall into first, which has to do with the Jews running the world. And
Right.
they show you
That's
like
what I
this,
mean by
yeah,
alt-right. Yeah.
well, that's not just only in the alt-right because the
Yeah.
conspiracy world is not left and right. So when I was younger and I fell into this, I wasn't political at all. Like I didn't know much about any of it. So when I
Right.
first heard about this stuff, just because I was a conspiracy theorist, there didn't seem to be a political bent to it all like we have today. But
Yeah.
there was the Elders of Zion
Right.
book that they always brought up, and that is actually a forgery that was made to make it sound like it came from Jews, but it was actually just propaganda against the Jews back in like by the Tsar in Russia
Right. Yeah, I'm
back
sure it
then.
runs back deep with Russia.
So there were all these things going on back then that they were doing that then they made a lot of propaganda. And it's the same thing in Nazi Germany. So people will pull up pictures of newspapers from back in the day that will say crazy stuff on them about Jews. And that's also
Yeah.
just propaganda. But even nowadays, you don't even know if that's true. So nowadays in the conspiracy world, I've noticed people are making up stuff and using AI and fake documents and stuff and fake quotes that
Right.
never existed. One of the things that I noticed they're doing is they're rewriting all the old conspiracy theories to make it
Yeah.
point towards the Jews. So
That makes sense. Yeah.
yeah, how no one ever mentioned that the Jews killed Kennedy. It was always the CIA and all this other,
Right.
stuff surrounding that, the mob, there was this whole storyline. Well, now that's changed to where they actually say that it was the Jews now.
Right, because now it's popular to do so. Now it's being accepted again. It's that same story being retold that the Jews are, the evil behind everything, right? They control the banks, they control the governments, they're controlling this war in Iran right now. That's what the conspiracy is, right? That's what they're it's the same thing. It's like it's always the Jews' fault according to these kind of conspiracy theories, which seem very compelling to a lot of people. But in the end, it's like it's that same. I've heard that story before, and it didn't end well the last time that we heard it.
Right. Hey guys, so it's that time where I need to ask you to subscribe to the channel. And if you're already subscribed, just hit the like, please. If you don't do this, I will be abducted by aliens. Thanks. So I actually have like a couple of clips of Mike Huckabee, because I
Yeah.
can show you some of the stuff he said. So let me pull that up.
Okay.
So I want to show this and read this first because
Yeah. And while you're doing that, I feel like we need to define even like some of these terms, like you said, like Zionism, alt right, because like what are the different there's different factions within even the alt right. And I'm very conservative. I'm like on the conservative side. But then you've got like, we talked about Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes earlier and everything where, they are more on the anti-Israel side, right?
so they are, but they're different.
Yeah.
So inside of the far right, you have people that don't care about Israel at all. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And then
right,
you have
right.
people that, so Nick Fuentes is not the same as Tucker Carlson, even though they
Yeah,
might sometimes have similar language. And one of the reasons why is because I think Tucker Carlson is trying to sound like Nick Fuentes. And that's why the interview with Mike Huckabee was pretty interesting to me, because a lot of people, if you're not in the far right circles, you might miss what's being said. So when he was asking Mike Huckabee about how come Israel can have an ethno state, and that's great, but
yeah,
places like England aren't allowed to, because that is a huge talking point on the far
right.
right now. And that's what there's a party that's been started
Yeah,
called the Restore Party, and the whole talking point is, well, one of the talking points is, and they go back and forth, like some of the writers on the far right over there, the young men, have gone back and forth with prominent Jewish members of their community about this topic, because the Jewish members of the community say, they're very explicit that that Israel is for the Jewish people. And then but then they say that the English if English men are saying we want England to be for England and not be overrun by
right.
people from Muslim countries, then they say that you are racist and you're not
Yeah,
accepting multiculturalism. And so
right.
there's this dichotomy and sort of hypocrisy that's being pointed out. And so
Yeah,
Tucker Carlson, I don't know if he actually believes the stuff that he's saying, because he doesn't explain it very well, and he
yeah. He's
explains it in a really weird way, but he is borrowing talking points from other people. So he might sound like other people, use the
yeah.
same language as them, but that doesn't mean like he necessarily agrees with them, or even has the same agenda that they do.
Look, I used to love Tucker. Like, I used to be a huge Tucker Carlson fan. I used to watch every, long form podcast that he did. And that's all. I don't want to sidetrack your point about Zionism into a whole nother thing. But interestingly, they're all very connected, and I can understand that argument from, people like Tucker or Nick Fuentes. England should be England.
Doesn't really talk about that.
Oh, that's more Tucker or some on
No,
the
that's
some on the
these are
alt-right.
these are far right gentlemen in England that are
Okay.
like prominent
Like
and have.
Tommy Robinson or
No, Tommy Robinson isn't for that.
oh, okay. I see.
Yeah, so it's like Carl Benjamin from Sargon of Akkad,
Yeah.
or not Tommy, Connor
Ah,
Tomlinson.
haven't yeah, I haven't heard very much of them. Maybe
Yeah, so
Tommy
they're
Tomlinson I've
considered
heard.
they are considered far right. You know what I'm saying? So that's what
Okay.
I mean. Like the far right is so vast and wide. So
Yeah. Right.
you have people that would be considered groypers that are young men,
Yeah.
probably between
Right.
the ages of 17 and 30, that are
Yeah.
followers of Nick Fuentes, and they don't all agree on the same things either. And a lot of their stuff is trolly, so they will
Yeah.
say things out in the public, but when they're not in the public and they're just normal, like most of them are just normal dudes, right? And then because they're not extreme in their daily lives like
Yeah.
that you see them doing in the on the public. And
Right.
then they're so a lot of their stuff is trolly. Then and their whole thing is they just feel like the there's that, not even all Jews, just that there's this faction of Jews that are having a lot of power over our politics and our
Right.
politicians, and they don't like that. And then and so it's really funny because Nick
Well, a
just went
lot of
on.
people believe that, though. Is it so? Is where does like Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson they fall on that camp, right?
Um, well, I don't know because Tucker Carlson is confusing to me because I think
Yeah.
he actually
Well, to
has
all
a
of us.
completely different agenda than what
Yeah.
Nick Fuentes has.
Yeah.
So I think there's something like a power play going on behind the scenes that we're only seeing the effects of and not the
Yeah.
actual thing. And I think that has to do with Tucker, because you have to remember Tucker is CIA, this Joe Kent guy is CIA, and all this stuff.
They were. I know Tucker's dad was CIA connected, right?
No, he was in the CIA.
His father was, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And Tucker Carlson grew up around this whole CIA world. He was then put into journalism, and then he traveled a lot with his dad to other countries doing things. And then if you watch what he does, he goes to a lot of countries and does
Right.
all kinds of stuff. And so I'm pretty sure he is not necessarily works for the CIA, but he's like an agent, like an
It's
un
hard
on the
to
books.
know. It's hard to know because kind of like you, how like you want to just sign on to things that you know are can be proven or facts, right? Like we were
Well, yeah,
talking
we
about.
can't prove it.
Yeah.
This is
But
just my
but Tuck,
opinion in my
right?
mind.
Yeah. But Megan, I mean, it's not that far fetched as a thing, but it's like Tucker is like an entire topic of like, I'm so fascinated by what happened to Tucker, like what he actually believes now. Is he, anyway, I don't want to sidetrack to, because we could talk about like, Tucker and everybody, but somehow in the middle of all of this, it all does tie back to the question of Zionism and then the different narratives surrounding Zionism.
So that is what the main thread that sort of runs through a lot of things.
I mean, it's the biblical grand narrative in a way, right? It's the land of Israel, or is it? It's that's where that debate lies too,
Yeah, and
theologically.
the
But
thing with the people I was telling you about on the far right in England, they're sort of upset with America and the state of Israel, not necessarily just all Jews, right? Just the state of Israel, because they see them both as like causing all this havoc in the Middle East, which is driving all the refugees to England and to Europe,
right,
right? That they're
yeah.
having to deal with. So then that's sort of the way they're coming at it.
And
So
what's driving the is the Muslim immigration to the European? What's their view on that?
the wars in the Middle East, the
The wars.
destabilization since like
Yeah.
the early 2000s with
I mean, that's
Tony Blair joined in on the whole thing, and then
yeah.
they ever since then were have been accepting tons and tons of refugees from there. So
I
they
mean, that's
see it as
kind of
a
true in a lot of ways, right?
yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing, but they also don't, as far as I can tell from their content, they're not like blaming every Jew in the world. And they're not saying Israel shouldn't exist. They're just saying we want England to exist for English people.
Right. I
So,
mean,
and
so I was gonna, because that's an interesting thing too, right? I was of the view that England should primarily be for English people. Like you should enter England if you're an immigrant and respect like the traditions of England. right? As a nation, the same way I would want someone in America coming here to assimilate and, you know, not work against the ideals of that nation.
Yeah,
So,
but they've brought
but
in
they push it too
too
far.
many, like too
Yeah.
many have come in that it's a overwhelming amount,
Right.
and
No, I mean,
it's
especially with
causing,
Islam. Yeah.
yeah, it's causing all kinds of problems for the people there. And there's that whole R word inquiry that Rupert Lowe did. It's the most horrific things you've ever heard or
I haven't
seen.
heard that because I don't know. So, what group is this, Megan? I haven't. I don't know if I've heard their stuff before.
Restore Britain is a new party that, like, so you had Nigel
Okay.
Farage with the Brexit and all that stuff, and it turns out
Yeah.
he's sort of swarmy, and he's actually connected to Candace Owens and her husband.
Oh man.
So then he had the Reform Party. Well, then they just started putting all these Tories into the Reform Party,
Yeah.
right? And so then the British people, like, are that are, turned on to all this stuff, started being like, what the heck? And so this man, Rupert Lowe, he's like older gentleman, he's very English, well-to-do off.
Right.
He started the Restore Britain program or party just recently. This just happened. And
Interesting.
he,
But are they like far right or are they just nationalist or like
well,
what's
they
their
would be
thing?
considered far right because I don't know if they
Right.
label themselves that way, but that's how they're labeled because they want Britain to be back to being, they're very nationalistic for their country. They want to,
Right.
they're gonna, Rupert Lowe says millions will be deported and we will not say sorry.
Right.
Sorry, it's
I mean,
happening,
is
millions
that a
will
bad
go.
thing though? It's like it's so I mean,
Well, I don't consider the far right to be a bad thing. Like,
right.
just in general, like there might be bad ideas or bad things people are saying, or a particular people I might not like, and I might not like certain ideas, but I don't think the far right is just in general a bad
Yeah.
thing.
Well, and that's where you have to define. It's so I'm like learning, it's so important to define like what do you mean by far right? What do I mean by far right?
So by
Like
far
people,
right, what I mean is anybody, like if you look at politics, political ideology as a line, you have pretty much libertarians are in the
yeah,
middle, and you will have some that come slightly right on that line, and those are called right-leaning libertarians. Then you'll have some that lean slightly left on that line, and those are left-leaning libertarians. And then
right.
it goes, to the left on this side farther, then it goes to the right on this side farther. And anybody that's to the right of Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, just your normal standard Republican are
Yeah.
considered far right because they're farther
I
to the
don't
right.
consider them far right, I guess. So like
Yeah,
Ted,
they're not. They're not. If
they're
you're
not.
if you're farther right than they are on the line.
Yeah. Well, you know what's interesting? I was just talking about this whole like spectrum of left and right. Because you have like the way I see it is you have like you're liberal, like if you're looking on the left side, you have a spectrum from like your Joe Biden liberal and your Kamalas, who are just not really left, they're just very liberal, they're in the kind of neoliberal type of way, not in like classic liberalism, um, like which we all are in a way, like all Western cultures are.
Well, yeah, classical liberalism is the line. That's
That's
the
the line.
line. That's the
Exactly.
base of what
Yeah.
we were all created out of.
Of
So,
our system, for sure. I agree. I mean, that's the line. But then you get like if if you go all the way left or if you go all the way right, it's like the far I mean, when I say far right, I mean like actual fascism where, you
oh,
know, you know what I mean? Like it's actually like you've got like I mean we can debate, Hitler was he on the far left or the far right?
yeah, I
Um
consider I consider fascism a leftist political ideology.
yeah.
Like, I don't consider it right at all, but I know some people do. So some people consider it like super far right.
So
To me, in my mind, super far right is the Amish who want, like,
yeah,
because when you're a right-leaning person, you want to just be left alone. You know what I mean? You
right,
don't want like
right.
all this stuff put on you. And in my mind, the farthest to have done that are like the Amish in our country.
Where they're just like leave. Yeah, I mean that's yeah,
Yeah.
that would be nice if we could all, do that to some degree. But yeah, I mean there's just so many like when I think of like Tucker Carlson and these guys, is it what's like alt-right versus far right? What would that be?
So alt-right is like the alternative right. So they
Yeah,
are, that was a term that was given to people that were coming up during Trump's first term, like before he even got
right.
elected president. There
Yeah,
were people on the right that just started popping up because, hey, there was somebody that they actually could get behind, right? So they weren't
yeah,
ever political. So then they started popping up and they're just so much different than the standard Republican, like I was saying, that
right.
they termed the coin alt-right for them.
Yeah, would you say Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes fit into that category?
Nick Fuentes is was called the alt-right, but now I'm pretty sure because no one really uses that term anymore, so it's just called all the far right now. And then now people are coming up with this term called dissident right, where
Right,
they're upset with everything that's going
right.
um, on the right. And so people are starting to call people that. And so Nick Fuentes could fall into that term.
Yeah,
But
I
I
mean it's
don't know
hard.
if he would consider himself that, but that
Yeah,
he considers himself far right. Like that's what he calls himself. He's not a Christian nationalist.
right.
He's not a civnat or what, it's civil nationalist. He's not a he doesn't even say he's racist. He says he loves everybody because he's a Catholic. So
But he does not like the Jews though, right?
he doesn't like that they have in his mind what he sees as an inordinate amount of power over politics and the politicians on the right.
Right.
So that's what
Okay.
he doesn't like about them.
Yeah.
And then because he does a live show, he can be pretty inflammatory. But then when
Right.
people, like, I've seen him say things where people will say something really extreme, like when they super chat him or something. And he's, no, we don't do that. We don't hate anybody. We're Christians. That's not what we're about. You know what I mean? And stuff like
Right.
that. So that's why it gets really confusing with him because a lot of people just see his clips and a lot of those clips are taken from his comment reading part segment of his show where him and the guys, because the show is for this specific group of men, get
Right.
really jokey and he will be really jokey with
It's a
them and
very
say,
specific like niche in a way, like you're like a
yeah.
geared towards a specific demographic age and guys are,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
I agree.
but it's so funny because he went on Gavin McGinnis's show not too long ago. And in that show, he was saying, because Gavin McGinnis really loves Jews and he has a lot of Jewish friends, really big, high up Jewish friends. And so Nick would say something because he'd be like, Nick, why do you got to be so hard on the Jews? Like
Right.
whatever. And then Nick would be like, well, I don't like that they're doing this thing. And he would explain
But
it. And
yeah,
and Gavin McInnes would go, oh, they're not doing that. Let me call my Jewish friend. And these were like, I can't remember the names, but everybody knows these names. They would answer
right.
the phone, be on the speakerphone, and he'd be like, hey, I'm with Nick Fuentes, and he says you guys are doing blah, blah, blah. And then the Jewish man on the phone is like, yeah, we are doing that. Yeah, he's right about that. He's like, what? And he did this like 3 times. And each time
Right.
they said, this is what they're doing. So it was just funny. But um, with Tucker, I think that Tucker has an agenda that's
Again,
different from
that's
Nick
also
Fuentes's. So Nick Fuentes just wants to get younger men to go to college, to Harvard and stuff like that.
okay.
And then he wants them to join the think tanks, the policymakers, because the positions behind the scenes are the ones who
Sure,
write
those are
everything. And
important. Yeah.
yeah, so he's like, so we can actually get America First policy in there. But he's not
Right.
an isolationist. He was super happy about Venezuela, the Venezuela
Okay.
situation. He's not happy about the Iran situation because he wants us to get out of the Middle East,
Well,
but
a
he still
lot
wants
of
us to have an empire. Like he's really into empires. So he's like,
right.
wants America to not be isolationist. So you can't really lump him in with Tucker Carlson.
Well, and
Be-
there's isolationists and then there's non-interventionists. Like they make a differentiation there too, where they just don't want us to interfere in other nations'
right.
affairs. But is that
Nick
that's like
Fuentes wants to interfere in other nations'
okay,
affairs.
but
Yeah.
Tucker probably not.
Yeah, it seems like whatever he's pushing is this, and I don't know why, and it might change because I think he's trying to get I honestly think he's trying to get JD Vance into
Yeah,
office because he's really behind JD Vance.
right,
He pushed him and some other people, David Sack, Peter Thiel, they all lobbied for JD Vance to become vice president,
right,
like
right.
to
And
President
he's
Trump.
buddies with Tucker, and there's a
Yeah,
whole thing there. But
yeah,
do you think
and
Tucker is truly not like? Well, go ahead. I don't want to interrupt you.
so I think there is this war behind the scenes where this small group of what is called the small tech wants to take over. I think there's like a power play going on in Washington behind the scenes with the powerful people, and I think that they want to get rid of the establishment right that's in there and replace it with this new group of
So
people.
are they? But they're not MAGA necessarily.
Well, they might be. I mean, some of them might be, but they have an ideology that is slightly different than what we would consider, I guess, like a hawkish neocon
Right.
like ideology and worldview. And whereas in Nick Fuentes is also aware of this group and he has been calling them out and say he doesn't trust them either. So Nick Fuentes doesn't trust the establishment
Yeah.
in there because he thinks they're
I
just
mean,
doing
these are all different factions on the right. It's like just like
right.
every political movement, every country like has so many different factions. That's why
But
things are so nuanced too. You have to like
be,
look at all the nuance of the situations.
or my thoughts. So the reason, hold on, can you still hear me?
I can now. It
Can you hear
was
me?
roboting for a minute.
Okay, sorry. So let me explain the
Yeah.
thought with Tucker though,
Yeah.
with the Jews. So I think the reason why Tucker is pointing out all this stuff with the Jewish faction that does have some political power, is because they are tied to the establishment right in so many obvious ways. So then that is a way they can discredit them and get the entire population to not be happy with the establishment right so that they can get this new group in. I think
Right.
that's why he's doing it.
To
That's why
get
he's
JD
pointing,
Vance's people in, basically. It's JD Vance and whoever's behind him.
yeah, like David Sachs, Peter
Right.
Thiel.
Or aren't they the one were they the ones doing the big investment in AI and infrastructure?
Yeah, so that's another reason
Isn't
why they
that
wouldn't
Peter
be
Thiel was
yeah, so they have a lot of actually the Gulf states have invested a lot in these AI companies that all these
yeah,
guys are connected to. And so if they get completely destabilized, which is kind of what's happening right now, all that they're going to pull all that money out because they're going to need it to rebuild and they're not being able to sell their oil and stuff like that. So there's a reason why these guys wouldn't want war in the Middle East. So,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, everyone has their reasons. But then what and we thought maybe in the beginning I thought maybe JD Vance, like I liked JD Vance in terms of his like personality. Seems like, he's going on the podcast with the guys and it's just like he's like one of us at first, but then I don't know. It's like like Marco Rubio started kind of shining more brightly in some ways. And I just got a bad, I don't know why. I don't know if you get this too, but I just got like a red flag for JD Vance and I've been going more towards Rubio.
I also had the same thing happen with me. Can you hear me?
I can. Yeah.
Okay. I actually had the same thing happen with me as well, where I didn't really like either one of them, but
Yeah.
I have becoming more warmed up to Rubio. Like I feel like he's doing a really good job in the State Department. And I read the National Security Strategy and I read it on my channel too. And he obviously wrote that or had a hand in writing it because it comes out of like where he is, and it mirrors a lot of his speeches in Munich. And I really, really like that strategy because it's saying we need to be more friendly with Russia, not completely trust them, but be,
Right.
on friendlier terms. Europe needs to be on friendlier terms with them, stop all this craziness.
It
It
would be
lays out
great if
each
we could trade with them.
yeah, yeah. So so there's just all kinds of crazy going on, but we'll probably get into it more. Let's
Yeah.
look at this post from Mike Huckabee. Okay, so Tucker and I had a very twisty and frankly confusing discussion about the meaning of Zionism. Now I have no idea if Tucker was trying to be difficult or we were just talking past each other, but he started out the discussion on Zionism by saying he wanted to ask me in my capacity as a former Baptist minister about the theology of Christian Zionism. But he kept dragging it to discussions about other topics, literally other countries, things that have nothing to do with the theology and certainly not with Israel, Zionism, or anything else. So let me make it very clear since he seemed more interested in the definition of political Zionism. It's simple. Zionism is the belief that Israel has a right to exist in safety and security. That's it. Pretty simple and straightforward. Now, I want to say something about this
Yeah.
because he says that it's simply the idea that it has the right to exist in safety and security. Well, I think they have the right to exist in safety and security because they are a country that does exist. They have borders that are, nationally or internationally recognized. They are a population there. They've built it up. They've even had some conquests, so they've gained land by conquest, which is an actual
Yeah.
thing. So in my mind, like I don't have to have a word for Japan existing. I don't have to have a word for, China existing. I don't go, I'm a Chinism because I believe they have the right to
Right.
exist. And so it's a little complicated to me when people say something like that because, well, why do we have to have a word for it? Because like of course they have the right to exist.
Well,
Like
so that's where the leftist argument comes in, where they don't believe that Israel has a right to exist because of the Palestinian question and question of rights to that land. Who actually has the rights to that land?
okay, so in this leftist mindset, what do they, so they, what would they do with all the Jews that are there?
They would probably have to leave, is
Okay,
my
but who's
guess.
going to make
But
them?
I
I
don't
mean,
know. I
who's
mean,
going to
I'm not
make them
a
leave? They have an
yeah.
army, they have, do you see what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
it's just weird. Like, okay, so a bunch of leftists say they don't have a right to exist. Who cares? Do these leftists have guns that are going there to force them
Right.
out?
Well, it's
You
like
know?
socialism, it's pie in the sky, a lot of it, I think a lot of leftism comes often from like a place of compassion or a place of depravity, sometimes both, where they have, maybe like empathy towards what's going on in people dying or people being displaced and in all of this. But but it's not realism. Um, it's not how the world works. And I think they just kind of, it's not realistic, right? Like, how are you going to move all those people out? Why would you? But it's even the question of who really belongs in that land, though. Like, we believe it's Israel for the reasons that you said, conquest being, one of them. Um, what about the biblical question of is it really their land historically? I would say it seems like it is, right?
But couldn't you say that about Native Americans?
Yeah, I mean you could, but and that's where that argument falls apart from the left also because it's just madness. It would be cultural suicide to be like we're just going to give all of our land back. It's just not how
Right.
history
So
works.
it's not a logical.
And that's what I mean by the left. Like they're some a lot of them are coming from like your normal guy, is coming from a place of compassion, but they're just outside the bounds of like reality and how things work. Like socialism sounds great on paper, but it doesn't actually work.
Right. But I mean, I'm saying like the biblical, like Mike Huckabee, because later on I found some other stuff where he says it differently. Let me show that to you. Let me show you that part.
I mean, I have, while you're looking at that, I have like anti-Zionist Christian friends that, don't believe Israel should exist. And then I have, even like people I know on the left who don't believe Israel should exist. And it's interesting how these sides converge. There is a lot of anti-Jewish or anti-Zionist sentiment on both the right and the left, which is kind of crazy because when both sides hate the Jews or hate Zionism, it gets a little bit strange, right?
Let me play this for you. It's very short.
Well, there was a letter that was put out by the more liturgical churches, the non-evangelicals, Catholic, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, a host. I think there's about 10 different denominations, and they said that they're the only ones who can speak for Christians in the Holy Land. I found that a little bit troubling because I'm not sure that anybody has the exclusivity to speak for all Christians in the world. And there was also a very, very targeted, kind of a pejorative hit at the term Christian Zionist. Bianca, I consider myself a Christian Zionist. All that means is that, yes, I'm a Christian. Everybody, I think, pretty well knows that. But to be a Zionist doesn't mean anything nefarious. It simply means that you believe that the Jewish people have a divine right, and frankly, a geopolitical right to a homeland that they have lived in for almost 4,000 years. And to say you're a Zionist means, do the Jewish people have a right to live in this land? I think most people would look at this if they're objective and say, well, of course they do. They've had connection here. So to say a person is a Christian Zionist, it's a Christian who respects that Jewish people should be living in the Holy Land. That's all it means. To say that it's somehow some term that ought to be fearful, or as Tucker Carlson said, it's indicative of a brain virus. There are tens of millions of evangelicals just in the United States who would be called Christian Zionists. Martin Luther King Jr., whose birthday we celebrated this week, was a Christian Zionist. So it should not be something that is divisive to Christians.
There you go.
It ought to be a term that every Christian should embrace.
Okay, so what do you think about that?
Yeah. I actually think Mike Huckabee did a great job in that interview overall. I thought Tucker was all over the place, but
Well, that
I
wasn't with Tucker. That was on a
that
news,
was
like Newsmax or something.
oh, that's right. Yeah. But I mean, I do think that I think Israel has a right to exist too. I think it's that argument he was making is similar to what I was saying in that there is a biblical claim to Jews living in that specific land of Israel and Judah and all that area, that region that spans back to the time of Moses.
Right.
So,
So we have a biblical record that lays out many stuff about Israel. There's even prophetic stuff, all kinds of stuff like that that is
right.
also brought into the conversation. I think what some people might have a problem with that is like a lot of people aren't Christian. So when you say,
That's right.
"Oh, well,
Right.
they have a biblical right to the
Yeah, they're
land," that
like, so
sort of
what?
sounds crazy to some
Right.
people. You know what I mean? Which
Right,
is
it would.
why I've always just been like, they are there, like
Right.
what do you want, to do?
Well, and that's what I was trying to get at with there. So there's people on the right that are anti-Zionist, like they don't believe that Israel should have the right to exist, and people on the left. They might have different reasons for why they don't want Israel to exist. On the right, it might be because they think that Israel has too much control over our politicians. On the left, it's the question of the Palestinians and where they're supposed to be and how I'm just trying to understand the mindset of both sides of that.
I don't know anybody that I listen to that actually says that Israel doesn't have a right to exist or calling for that. I just
Oh
there's
yeah,
a,
you're
a
very
lot of
lucky.
yeah, a lot of
They're
them
like
just don't.
everywhere, Megan.
No, no, that I listen to, like, you know what I'm
Right,
saying? Like,
right.
but online on
Yeah.
X and stuff, I see people like very evilly to the saying very evil stuff about just like basically all Jews. And
Right.
I guess they explicitly probably would
That's
like
just
them not to exist,
explicitly,
you
yeah,
know.
that's explicit.
Um
I don't know
uh
anyone like that who's like openly, just don't like Jews. But then you've got anti-Zionists that, you know, don't believe Israel should exist for whatever reason. But to me, it's like you're still ultimately saying you don't want this entire nation, this entire group of people to exist, which is a crazy statement to make,
right,
isn't
like
it?
what are they going to do with them if they don't like Jews so much? Are they going to come here? Like,
I
I
don't
mean,
know. They'd have to
what
be
is the
displaced, I
plan?
guess, according. Yeah, right. No, that's a good question. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
that just doesn't make any sense to me at all. Like,
theologically, I feel like I feel more comfortable even commenting on it on the question of Zionism. But yeah, politically too, Israel is an ally, a U.S. ally. So if you're for the United States, you should at least generally be for Israel because they are a political ally. And then on top of that, we've got a lot more in common with Israeli values as Americans who are generally founded upon Christian principles in our nation. And so, we have a greater affinity with their mindset, even though we are different. They're coming out of the Middle East. It's a very different region, just socially even. But there's a
well,
lot that we can be pro-Israel on.
the thing about that, though, is that you have a lot of people on the right that are very anti-war because of all the traumatizing
Right.
forever wars in the Middle East. And it's not just the Middle East. I mean, there are things that we don't even know about because they don't tell us about them, but it's certainly happening if you pay attention, where they are, they're disabling Georgia. They're doing
Right. Oh, it's
um,
constant. Yeah.
all this stuff constantly, our government is. So
Right.
there's a lot of people who are against that. And I think you can still be pro America and still against the war. But also, I think
Yeah.
you should be
I agree.
pro your American troops, though,
Yeah,
because they're putting
definitely.
themselves in danger. They're not doing it to anybody. Like,
Yeah.
that's their job that they have to do. And so there's a lot of stuff that the government does that I don't agree with, and including Israel. I just don't talk
Right, of
about it
course.
because it's
Yeah.
like I'm just
And
a
that's
right.
the
Like,
thing.
who cares what
Because
I think about that? You know what I mean?
Right. Well, because then you get your hyper Christian Zionists, like if you think of like John Hagee or someone, for those old enough to, remember John Hagee, but where it's extreme, where it's just like we have to like support Israel and help them build the third temple, which
Okay,
is
so
going to be
that's
for the Antichrist,
interesting. So what? Yeah. So
I'm
can
not
we?
on. See, if one thing, Megan, I'm hoping no one knows if I'm completely pro-Zionist or anti-Zionist at this point,
I
because
know.
it's such a nuanced question that I want people to like think like critically through it and not just go with whatever, information warfare propaganda is you're being fed,
And
you
it is
know,
on both sides. Like,
on
that
both sides. Yeah,
information warfare propaganda is on both sides. And then on
definitely.
all sides on the right, it's really going on too. The right is under an immense propaganda attack
Yes,
at the
they are.
moment from
Right.
many different places and layers.
Yeah, important to think critically through every piece of information that you hear. I mean, you don't have to be like, where you're like a nut job about it, but just like reasonably, you have to like use your reason and think through all the propaganda that we're constantly hearing.
So here is a Bible verse. I don't know if you can see it, but it's Genesis 12, 1 through
Okay,
3.
perfect.
And
Yeah.
Ted Cruz used this Bible verse when he was talking to Tucker Carlson in that interview that they did. And this was his justification for why he feels so strongly. He literally told Tucker that as a American congressman, a representative or senator, that he wakes up every day with the explicit, you know, being of wanting to be the strongest and most best supporter of Israel in the America State Senate. Now, that's okay, I guess, for him to feel that way, but I can also see why some people would have a problem with that because he's supposed to be representing Texas. Why is he so, you know, gung ho to represent another country? And then some people have pointed out, like, imagine, a senator coming out and saying, every day I wake up to be the strongest supporter of China that I can possibly be in the Senate,
Right.
the US Senate or whatever. And
Yeah.
so some people think that that's really weird. He was telling Tucker, like, if we have to do this to Israel because we're commanded to in the Bible. And then he
Right.
uses this verse. I'm going to read it.
Genesis 12. Yeah.
Yeah. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curse thee. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. So, what do you think about that
Yeah.
verse?
Well, this is the verse that divides a lot of Christians into the Zionist or anti-Zionist camp, depending on how you understand this verse. Because it's talking about, if you bless Abraham, you will also be blessed. So it's that's like one of the main verses. But if you go to Genesis or Galatians 3, talks
Let me
about,
pull that up.
yeah. And while you're pulling that up, I'll kind of give a little background to it. With Genesis 12, I do think you can bless the physical Israel, the spiritual Israel, and be blessed. And there's a difference between the physical and the spiritual Israel. But I'll let Megan pull up Galatians 3 before I go too further on that.
Okay, so I've got Galatians 3 up here. Did you want me to read the whole chapter?
Probably not all of it, for sake of time and really getting to the pertinent part. But it's probably further down around 16. Yeah, 16 right there. So it's
Okay.
basically Galatians 3:16. But just to give you a tiny bit of background to that is, the Bible talking about being the children of Abraham by faith, right? And so keep that in the background of what we're talking about. But yeah, go ahead, and if you want to read that one.
Okay. Now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. He saith not, and to seeds as of many, but as of one, and to thy seed, which is Christ. And this I say, that the covenant that was confirmed before God in Christ, the law which was 430 years after, cannot disannul, that it should make the promise of none effect.
Okay, so right about there is the main part, especially Genesis, or I'm sorry, I keep saying Genesis, but Galatians 3:16. What Paul here is explaining in the New Testament is that promise to Abraham, to Abraham and his seed, were the promises made. He saith, and he saith not, and to seeds as of many, but as of one, and to thy seed, which is Christ. So, what he's basically saying is that you have to be in Christ to be of the seed of Abraham, because that seed is ultimately the spiritual seed. And so he says that seed of Abraham isn't it's those who are of Christ. It's Christ himself, in fact, because he's saying it was to like a seed, a single seed, that the promise was made, which is Christ. Does that make sense?
Yes, the promise was made to Christ, essentially.
To Christ. Yeah, that seed of, blessing, you have to be in Christ to have the blessing, because that's how, the wrath of God is taken off of you, uh, when we put our faith in Jesus Christ and we get saved. So,
Right.
in that sense, that seed is a spiritual seed, So if we're talking about Zionism from a spiritual standpoint, we're talking about the future Zion, which is going to come down from heaven to earth. And, and then God is going to establish his kingdom, the millennial reign, and fulfill all the promises made through Christ to the church and to the seed, which is Christ
So I
himself.
actually have a verse that can add to this.
Okay.
Hebrews chapter 11.
Yeah.
Okay, so it says, by faith, Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he should after receive for an inheritance, obeyed, and he went out, not knowing where he went. By faith, he sojourned in the land of promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. He
Right.
looked for a city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God.
Exactly that same promise. It's that same promise that he made in Genesis 12. Whoever blesses the seed of Abraham will be blessed, right? So that seed is Christ. So you have to be in Christ as a believer in order to receive that blessing.
Yeah, and then it says, through faith also Sarah herself received strength to conceive seed and was delivered of a child when she was past age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. Therefore sprang there even of one, and him as good as dead, so many as the stars of the sky in multitude, and as the sand which is by the seashore innumerable. All these died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, and were persuaded by them, and embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth.
Yeah. So it's all by faith, So it doesn't mean you don't have the physical Zion here still, which is, I believe, like my view is that it's the physical land of Israel. There is a physical Israel, there's a physical Zion. And through God's providence, because he's the controller, of nations, he brought together the nation of Israel back again in 1948. And they are a nation now. They have a right to exist. But spiritually, we are talking about the real Zion, the real Jerusalem, which exists in heaven. And, that's going to be realized when Jesus returns back to the earth. And, I don't know how many of your, our listeners are believers and understand all of this, but that's the religious, or Christian view of it, I believe,
So
that
when you
it's,
said that one guy, what was his name? You said that he was really extreme and said that they even promoted building the third temple.
yeah, I mean, so there is a whole movement of Christian Zionists who, not the way maybe Mike Huckabee said it, although but there's like, it's kind of like with like the right, there's like so many different levels of it, and so you get these extreme Christian Zionists who do want to, like, there's funds, they're always like, send money to rebuild the temple. Like, there's organizations that are working to rebuild that third temple in Jerusalem, and a lot of Christians do fund that.
I have heard anti-Zionists who are supposedly Christians say things like, "Oh, the Jews they're there and they're building the third temple and like trying to
Right.
bring back the Antichrist." And then that also is confusing to me because I'm like, "Look, that's all in God's timeline. So if that's what's going to happen, that's what's
It
going
is
to
gonna
happen. Like
happen. It is
why
gonna
on earth
happen. Yeah.
like you know what I'm
Right.
saying? Like why would you say that like if you know that that's a prophecy, right?
Right.
In the Bible, well, we're not gods. We don't know how he's going to go about making that come
Yeah,
to
we don't have
fruition.
control over that.
So if that's actually happening, then why are we upset if it's God's will in the Bible?
Yeah, I mean, it's how things are gonna play out. It's like, how much did God allow to happen and is gonna allow to happen? And I do think we can, like, through our like volition, we can, push closer to that time, or we can, try to maybe go backwards in that time a little bit and forestall the time of the end or the tribulation. period. But ultimately, yeah, it's going to happen. You know, if we understand Daniel 9 correctly, and we understand some of Jesus's words in Matthew 24 and the Olivet Discourse correctly, it seems to indicate that that third temple will be rebuilt, and then they'll usher in the Antichrist, who's going to pretend to be Christ, and he's going to sit in that temple and declare declare himself to be God.
Well, right,
So
because we have a so like Christians believe that Jesus Christ is returning. That's the second coming. Then the Jews believe that uh Jesus hasn't, like, what they call Mashiach has not came yet. So they're
that's right.
expecting that person. And then Muslims think that the prophet is coming back.
Yeah, and the Shia Muslims believe it's the Mahdi,
Okay.
which is that's their Antichrist. Some people may have heard of that, but the Mahdi is like their third imam, or their 13th imam, or their 13th prophet that was supposedly is currently hiding in a cave. That's just like their folklore, or their.
You are Iranian, right?
Yeah,
So,
I was born in Iran, but I'm a U.S. citizen, but I was born in
yes,
Iran.
you're of Iranian heritage.
Yes.
And so,
Right.
was your family Shia, or were they
No.
a
So it's interesting. I mean, okay, so I have like one side of my family was very like very secular. And then like my mom was very secular. My dad's side, he had family members that were uh and are still Muslim. And then they would be Shia Muslims, yeah, which is the current conflict, the crazy the Ayatollah, who's now no longer.
Okay, so they are the majority Muslim group that is in Iran.
So in Iran, the Muslim group is predominantly Shia,
Yeah.
which is basically a branch off of the main Islam, which was like what like the ISIS groups are, the
The Sunni
Shia and
Muslim.
Sunni. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I started looking into that a little bit more as like this issue with Iran and all of that began to happen, more recently. But I was just fascinated about what did like the Shias actually believe, and so part of it is that their 13th imam. So you had a succession of imams, which are like their prophets, and the 13th is supposedly like he went into hiding like hundreds of years ago or whenever it was, and he's supposed to come back out at the end of the world and save everybody,
Hmm.
from the Jews probably, or from
Right.
right. So it's like this whole thing, and of course, so that's their version of Christ, in a sense of like their savior, which is going to be the Antichrist. Or you've got like the Jews are also like the unbelieving Jews in Israel, or just Jews around the world are waiting for their Messiah or Messiah,
Well,
to
I don't
come.
think that and I don't mean to offend any Muslim people watching, so this is just how I feel, but I don't think anything that they have saying is gonna happen, right? Because it's not real in my mind. And
Well,
so, but
yeah,
the Jewish prophecy of their Messiah coming back is an actual real thing that's in the
right.
Bible, and it's going to be a Jewish man because he would have to be from a certain lineage and fit the way it's written in scripture.
Well, it
So,
has to be someone the Jews would accept, or if it's ideally a unifying figure, it would have to be a unifying figure that every religion would accept, including Christianity, Islam, Judaism, because they all have to fall in line, right? In order to, I mean, you're not supposed to. You're supposed to resist, of course, but that's the prophecy.
well, I
Is that
guess it could. I guess I don't. there's a lot of stuff that are around eschatology that I don't necessarily believe. Like, I think a lot of
Yeah.
it might actually be just for that region, and but we're like extrapolating it out like
Right.
to the entire population. And so I don't have my thoughts clearly worked out on all that. So I know
Yeah. It's
many
a big
different
one.
yeah, I know many different, people who talk about the eschatology, and I looked into it all, and then I read it myself, and then I have been mulling it over in my brain for like years, you know what I mean, without
Right.
making a full decision. But I started actually kind of like the more I read it and the more I thought about it, I started thinking, okay, well, it has to, and I could be completely wrong, but I was like, it'd have to be a Jewish person because the Jews aren't going to believe
Yeah.
that, like the Pope is the Messiah because
Right.
it has to fit the scriptural
It
stuff.
has to be someone that the Jews will accept, but that's what I mean in the sense that if there's one figure that ultimately is the Antichrist, the Muslims would be like, "Hey, this is the Mahdi. We need to follow him." The Jews would be
Right.
like, "This is the Messiah. We need to follow him." So I don't know what all of the qualifications would have to end up being in order for everyone to accept, because it's going to be a worldwide where like every false religion is going to be united under, the one, right?
Yeah.
Um, so, but yeah, there has to be. It's an interesting question. It's one of those things too. We don't know um, fully until that time is unveiled.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't appear like that's happening anytime soon because nobody
I mean,
nobody
I hope
agrees
not,
with
Megan.
any
I mean,
no one at this point in time, no one would
yeah,
fall under anybody. Like you couldn't get every single person
yeah.
to go along with anything at this point,
Well,
right?
not at this point. Yeah,
Um,
you'd still need a major event.
okay, so I have an interesting YouTube video, and we're not going to watch the whole thing, but I thought we could watch some of it and you could tell me when you want me to pause it.
Yeah.
It's a group of women talking like like sort of like a debate, and on one side are anti-Zionist Christians and on the other side are Zionist Christians. I hope you're prepared.
Oh, my two
Um,
favorite groups. Okay, let's see.
I know. I know. Let me find it.
So it's a Zionist Christian talking to an anti-Zionist Christian?
No, there's like it's a debate group, like a group
Okay.
of them. Um,
Okay. This should be
Zionist and
interesting.
Christian
So, yeah.
anti-Zionist, and we're going to have a conversation.
Hi, I'm Lisa, and I am a Christian anti-Zionist woman.
Hi, I'm Jillian, and I am an anti-Zionist Torah observant Christian.
Hi, I'm Morgan Ariel, and
and
I
tell me
am
when you
a
want me to
Christian,
pause it.
Okay. We'll
anti-Zionist,
do.
Christian cultural commentator.
Hi, I'm Hannah, and I'm a
Okay.
Christian.
So
It's already funny.
I'm already pausing it.
Yeah,
So do you
go
see
ahead.
this woman in
Yeah.
the yellow? This
Yeah.
woman reminds me a lot of these haughty women that are saying they're anti-Zionist, like the Carrie
Right.
Jean Pierre lady, and their attitude, and Candace Owens even, their attitudes like just spew like haughtiness. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So she reminds me of that.
Yeah, I get that from the left also. There's a real like lineup between them.
Yeah.
Christian anti-Zionist. Hi, I'm Dominique. I am a Christian Zionist.
Hi, I'm Eliana, and I'm a Christian Zionist, Catholic Zionist.
Hi, I'm Eden, and I am a evangelical Christian Zionist.
Hi, I'm Maddie, and I'm a Catholic Zionist political commentator.
Welcome, ladies. Before we begin, I would like to hear from one person from each side. Can you please define Christian Zionism? Anyone can jump in there.
There's actually two different definitions. First, we have the fact that Jews have a biblical right to the land, and the second definition we have is that Jews have a divine right to the land or a natural right to the land. So essentially a biblical right or a natural right.
And when you say
That's
the
like
land,
what we were
you're referring
talking
to
about.
What were you
That's a
saying?
lot. That's a lot like what we were talking about. There's like a natural political right for Israel to exist versus a spiritual right for them to exist. She believes in both that they have as a Christian Zionist.
Right.
Okay. Anyone on this side wanted
Belief in a sovereign Jewish nation state of Israel. They believe that the Jews are to be brought to the Holy Land, and that is the prerequisite for the coming of the Messiah.
And the first prompt is,
Coming of the
the state
Messiah.
of Israel today
Okay.
is a fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Okay. Anyone can take it away.
as a Christian who does observe Torah, there is a level of, really studying Old Covenant versus New Covenant. And so I take that very seriously, especially with my platform. And so when I
Okay,
think about,
if you could stop it on her for a sec. I found her interesting because she's a Torah observant Christian, which is basically an oxymoron. I don't understand that because you either follow the law for your salvation or you follow Christ and you're under the new covenant for your salvation. Is that what she's saying, Megan? Not
She's of do you remember that Hebrew roots
Yeah,
movement
it's
back
like
in
the
the day?
Hebrew root stuff. Yeah,
That's what she is.
right.
She's just saying Torah observant so that
And
she
I
doesn't.
I had like friends caught up in that, right? So I know there might be people even
I
listening
got
that
caught
are
up in that when I
you
first
got caught
became
up
a
in that.
Christian, like not right
Yeah.
away, but like later as I started exploring
There's
more.
just so many error
And
you're like, yeah,
I got caught up in that for a little bit, and then I was like, once I learned more and more, I was like, this is absolutely not right.
yeah.
Like,
And there's
um,
different extremes of it. It starts with like you have to say Yeshua instead of Jesus to be
right.
more accurate or something. And I'm going, I don't know, because my Bible says there's no salvation under any, other name given among men, by which we must be saved, but the name of Jesus. And it's like, I know that's written to our language. So, like, I got saved by Jesus. Not by any other name. So it's just a whole
Yeah.
nother big thing.
Yeah, and
But
they make it super legalistic. Like, then they keep going. Like, they're like, oh, you got to wear the fringes and you got to do all this
yeah,
stuff, but
well,
you
that's the
can't. No,
Judaizing.
yeah, so it's very bizarre, but I think I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I think that's what she is. It's just I think Hebrew roots is sort of like out of
Yeah, that's
out
probably
of
where she's coming from. And I would tell people to look at Galatians 3 again. That same chapter goes over a lot of that. But yeah, let's see
how
what she says.
the state of Israel today exists. I would not say that it is a fulfillment of biblical prophecy because the state of Israel has completely forsaken their covenant with God.
Anyone want to respond to that?
Yeah,
Oh,
well, I'd like to
interesting.
start with
Yeah.
um,
You
the
want to
fact
stop
that the
there real
covenant
quick
was made.
too? So she talks about. I was surprised to hear her saying. Was that the Torah observant one that said that Israel doesn't
yeah.
have a right? That
Yeah.
surprised me. I would have thought it would be the
She
other
said
way.
that they're not fulfilling their covenant with God.
Right. And that's what a lot of actually there's like fundamental Baptists and like the new IFB. I don't know if you know about the new IFB. It's like
What's his
that
name?
crowd, yeah,
Uh,
which became a disgrace.
and Steven
The,
Anderson,
the
right?
unnamed one. Yeah, I don't
Oh,
even
the
want to
unnamed.
name his
Don't
name.
say his
Yeah.
name. I don't
Don't
want to.
even say his name. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
No,
Sorry.
but I'm kidding. But I mean, I'm half kidding. Let's put it that way. But
Yeah,
yeah, that's sort
I
of the
followed
whole.
all that stuff that happened with him.
Right. I mean, so there's a serious strain of anti-Zionism also. That's what I was kind of touching on earlier from Christians
Oh, I
that are
forgot
more on
about
that.
that. Yeah, he
Yeah.
is of that. He even made didn't he make like a
There's a whole
documentary or something?
documentary on it.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that's
Okay.
like a whole big thing where because and theologically there is some truth to it, but it's just, with anything else you can twist it and like enlarge certain things and focus on certain things to come up with like malinformation or bad teaching.
I
They
find it odd because the question right now is the state of Israel today a fulfillment of biblical prophecy? And then
right.
the other group said no. And it's like, well, how could you possibly know that? Because God might be, I mean, who knows what he's doing? It could be setting things in
He could be
motion for the
setting it in
future,
motion. That's kind of
that
what
we
I think. Yeah.
yeah, that we don't even know about. So it's like, who am I to say something? That's not
Well,
my job
so
description,
So their view from like a doctrinal standpoint was that because the the Jews or the Pharisaical Jews broke their covenant with God by rejecting Jesus Christ, that all of the promises to them are now null and void and broken, and now those promises are only attainable by the new covenant of Jesus Christ, which there's a lot of truth to that. in the sense of salvation, like you have to be, according to the New Testament, to the Bible, you have to be a Christian, right, to
I
be saved.
have a definition of what that is. So that is called replacement theology, right?
Yeah, so that
So
group does
here,
take a replacement theology perspective. Yeah,
yeah, so replacement theology is the Christian doctrine that the Christian church has superseded the Jewish people as God's covenanted people,
yeah,
assuming their role as the new Israel. And I was looking into this more, and this was also this here supersessionism is more
right.
the like advanced, like I go to biblical theology, like and a word for it. So here, so it's called so supersessionism, also called fulfillment theology by its proponents, and replacement theology by its distractors. So I guess replacement theology is actually a negative word that's been put on these people. And
Yeah,
so
and
because
sometimes they'll embrace it,
they
but
call it
yeah,
fulfillment. And so this is the Christian doctrine that the Christian church has superseded the Jewish people, assuming their role as God's covenanted people,
yeah.
asserting that the new covenant through Jesus has superseded or replaced the Mosaic covenant.
I mean, in the spiritual sense, it's true. Like the new covenant has replaced the old covenant. Like the old covenant was, you have to, it's a Mosaic law. You have to go through certain ceremonial rites in order to be saved. But where they're wrong is that the church hasn't replaced Israel. We've just been grafted into the same vine. And this, like Paul talks about this in Romans 11. I don't know if you want to, if you want to look at Romans 11 or
Yeah,
not,
let me pull that up.
but it kind of goes over
I
that.
know that there's a place in Romans where Paul says that the partial blindness has been put over the Jews
That's right.
until the fullness of the Gentiles comes in.
Yeah. And so there's going to be remnant of Jews saved throughout all of time, starting with the apostles, Paul, James, all these different Jewish, believers, to the Jew that's being saved today. Like someone who's like an ethnic Jew or someone who's a Jew basically accepts Jesus Christ as their savior. That's a remnant of the Jews being saved throughout all time.
Okay, what did you want me to read in?
Okay, yeah. So I don't know if I want to do the whole thing, but which part was that? So basically, it's talking about the root.
So it says up here in verse 1, it talks about, I am an Israelite of the seed of Abraham. God has not cast away. Okay, so let's just start at the beginning. I say then, hath God cast away his people? God forbid, for I also am an Israelite of the seed of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin. God hath not cast away his people which he foreknew. What ye not what the scripture saith of Elias, how he maketh intercession to God against Israel, saying, so that's about, okay,
So,
so let me,
and then verse 5 is about the remnant being elected to grace. And then he talks about
okay.
how it's by grace only. But there's a part, I don't know if I think it's Romans 11. I was just kind of going by memory, but there's the vine and, the natural branches. There it is.
Okay, here we
Both
go.
not
Yeah.
right.
So
That part talks about, so yeah, if you want to read it and we'll kind of talk about it.
for if the first fruit be holy, the lump is also holy. And if the root be holy, so are the branches. So the root is Jesus, right?
The root is Jesus. Exactly.
And the
Yeah.
first fruit is also Jesus. Like he was the first fruit of the resurrection, right?
Yeah, he's the first fruit, and then you have the branches.
The lump is also holy, and if the root be holy, so are the branches. And if some of the branches be broken off, and thou being a wild olive tree were grafted in among them, and with them partakest of the root and the fatness of the olive tree.
Yeah,
Now
right there.
I think this part, where
Yeah.
they get confused is they say if some of the branches are broken off, like they think that the branches, like meaning the Jewish people, were broken off. But actually, I think it's just saying like it had to take some branches off to graft us
Well,
onto a tree. So I don't
so
saying.
I kind of take that view, Megan, in this sense, though. We have to kind of explain it again to get the nuances of it. So, like, the way I look at it is if some of the branches, and if some of the branches be broken off, right? So the
Mhm.
branches, I do believe the original branches were the Jews. Jesus is the vine. They had to be, it's like that covenant, that old covenant had to be cut off. And then the wild olive tree, that would be the Romans, the Greeks, the Gentiles, basically. They were grafted in. So that's when, like, when like the
But
Jews,
it doesn't say all. It just says some, and then it says and with them. So it's talking about we're grafted in among them. So that's the nations, and with them partaketh of the root. So it doesn't sound like they're all broken off, right?
I'd have to look at that.
Okay, I'll reread it to you. And if some of the branches be broken
Oh,
off,
I see. Because that
and
part you're saying some
yeah,
and being a wild.
and
So the
thou being a
some,
wild olive tree wert grafted in among them, and
right.
with them partakest of the root and the fatness of the olive tree.
Right. Then boast not against the branches. So he's saying, like, don't boast against the Jews. But if thou boast, thou bearest not the root, but the root thee. And he says, thou will say then the branches were broken off that I might be grafted in. Well, because of unbelief, they were broken off, and thou standest by faith. So it's basically those who didn't believe were broken off of among the Jews. Though that's the sum, the ones that didn't believe, but then
Well,
those
that
who
would be
did
like
believe,
that would be the majority of Jews alive today and
yeah.
that exist, right? So
Well, so
that's what's so confusing about the whole thing, you know?
so if you understand it in the sense of salvation, he's talking about
Right.
how do you get saved? It's not by being a Jew. It's not by, the old, like being a Hebrew roots person and being in the law and being Torah observant. Like none of that is going to save you. The only thing that's going to save you is faith, belief in Jesus. And that's how, so the Jews that were unbelieving were broken off of the vine and who's Christ. And then those who did believe, even among the Greeks, the Romans, the Gentiles, the non-Jews, were grafted in, which is why you can be saved, I can be saved. It's not only
Well,
for the
this
Jew.
part 24 is interesting. For if thou wert cut out of the olive tree, which is wild by nature, and were grafted contrary to the nature
Right.
into a good olive tree, how much more shall these which be the natural branches be grafted into their own olive tree?
Exactly. So the Jews are gonna come back. This is how I look at it. So the Jews are there's gonna be a revival of Jewish believers as we get into the end times, and like Zechariah talks about it in like Zechariah 13. It says they'll see him whom they have pierced, and they'll mourn for him as for an only son. That's in the Old
Yes.
Testament.
Yes, and then it also says here, for I would not, brethren, that ye be ignorant of this mystery, that ye should be wise in your own conceits, that blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles
Right.
be come in. So that's what I was talking
That's
about.
what you were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and so
Yeah,
this is the part in Romans, and then it says, and so all Israel shall be saved, as it is
that's
written,
right.
there shall come out of Zion the deliverer, and shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob.
Exactly. So it comes full circle to what you were talking about, which is that so basically all the Jewish believers and Gentile believers are going to be grafted into the one vine, which is Christ, but we're still different parts of the vine. We're different branches. So this refutes replacement theology because
Okay.
replacement theology says Christianity replaces it all, replaces the Jews, but this says that no, the believing Jews retain their identity and the Gentile Christians, and
And
we're
the
all like
promise,
one.
and they retain the promise,
And they
right?
retain, yeah, but you have to be a believer to retain the promise.
But they're going like in the future, like they can get the promise back in the future.
I mean, yeah, and now, like, so, like, if you like,
And now.
if like someone who's not a believer believes today, they'll receive the promises that given to Abraham, which is that they're going to be blessed and they're going to go to heaven. So that's what that Genesis 12 ultimately points to. It's the seed, which is Christ. It's, this idea of the vine and the different branches, Jewish believers, Gentile believers grafted into the one vine. So there is a plan for the Jews, in other words, and
Okay.
it's that they be saved.
Why is this is not our job, you know what I mean, to figure out like if you should have this, or I'm just,
Right.
it's kind of weird. But okay, let me
But
go
but this
back
is why
to,
it's such a complicated question, right? But yeah, let's go
know.
back to, yeah.
To God with God. We see when he makes the covenant in, I think it was Genesis 15. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's long, but essentially he makes a covenant with Abraham, who is asleep. So he makes it with himself. God cannot break the covenant. So as we see, passes through the parts, and Abraham's asleep. I don't think a sleep person can consent to a covenant being made. So when you talk about like keeping their end of the deal, well, we see time and time throughout the Bible this narrative of the way that God keeps his covenant to us even though we don't deserve it. And so I find it really strange that we put this on the Jewish people, that they just walked outside the covenant. None of us can earn a covenant. So
Okay,
I
can we
disagree
pause it
because
real quick?
Yeah.
So, and I'll try to keep it brief for this time so we can continue. But that's exactly what she's saying, is that that covenant can't be broken is true, but it's only fulfilled in Christ or through Christ. So, do you know
Yeah,
what I
like
mean?
I think that might be the part people leave out, and I kind of am wondering if they leave it out because it's a little offensive.
Maybe.
Like
Yeah,
it would be offensive to Jews, and if any
it would
Jews are
be.
watching, I
Yeah,
apologize and are not trying to offend you. I love I love everybody and whatever.
absolutely.
We're just going over the different beliefs of Christians. And you know what? I found a lot of Jews don't know much about our religion. I saw some Jews the other day just didn't know that we consider Passover as like that was Jesus. Like in the Old Testament, the blood over the door and the lamb and all that, like they didn't know that like we associated that to Jesus, like as Christians.
Right, because he's our
Um,
Passover lamb. I mean, there's so much of an interconnection between the Jewish like culture and the Torah and the law and the prophets and Christianity, right? Because that's what I mean.
But
Wherever you are,
we don't interpret it the same way that Jewish people do. So the Jewish people that were looking at it, they're like, this is our celebration of God delivering us from
from the
Egypt.
Pharaoh, yeah,
Yeah, and I'm like, yeah, I know that, but like that's not, we don't say that about, we say
right.
it's Jesus, like it represents Jesus in the
Well,
Old Testament.
exactly, from a Christian standpoint, the Passover and everything in the Old Testament was just a foreshadow of Jesus Christ in the New.
Right. Like even the matzah balls having stripes on them, and Isaiah saying, you are healed by his stripes, and the matzah balls can't have
Right.
any leaven in them, which represents no sin, which represents Jesus. And they had to have stripes on them because he was whipped and all that. So it goes
Yeah,
all the way down to like the matzah. We see
that's
Jesus in the
amazing.
matzah.
Yeah,
Like,
no, that's really cool. I
um,
didn't know that.
oh yeah, like there's so much interesting stuff in the Old Testament that to Christians points to Jesus.
Yeah,
Look, I'm gonna be real honest with you guys. If I can't get people to subscribe or like, YouTube will literally send aliens to my house. Do you want me to be probed? I need you to like and to subscribe. Thank you. So, okay, let's get back to the
yeah, we'll
video.
keep it going.
I figured you would like this video.
It is
If you read
interesting
further
for
than
sure.
just Genesis 15, you go to Genesis 17, it clarifies because after Abram, he wasn't even Abraham yet, once Abram was literally blessed by Melchizedek, and that is a fulfillment of biblical prophecy of Jesus in his own, once he presents bread and wine to Abram to bless him for his faith and his walking with the Lord.
That's true.
You know, God then clarifies to Abram, before he was even Abraham, that the covenant was conditional. He says, if you walk in my ways and, if you do what I say, I will give you the land. And then he expounds upon what Abraham's seed
Okay,
looks like.
do you
This
want
is
to
a
pause it
fulfillment
there
of biblical.
really quick? Those are like the blessings and cursings in Deuteronomy given by God to the Jews. So like those were conditional. If you follow the law, you would be blessed. If you didn't follow the law, you would be cursed. You'd be prosperous if you did. Your nation would be invaded if you didn't. So it's really talking about that. But the promise in Christ is not conditional. I mean, it's only conditional upon belief. You believe, and that's the only condition. But anyway, just wanted to point that out.
Yeah.
Prophecy, and it is absolutely incredible to see how Jesus plays into it all in the new covenant.
I can totally read into the covenant with Abraham and see the foreshadowing of Christ, so I'm not disagreeing with that whatsoever. I think when we look to the Old Testament, God even promises to bring remnants of Israel back together, even despite the disobedience of Israel. Actually, it's a testament to his everlasting covenant and to his promise with Abraham. So I actually view the disobedience of the Jews and the fact that the state of Israel is still thing today as a fulfillment of that promise, that God constantly brings the Jews back to him. Throughout the Old Testament, we see them constantly disobey, and the Lord, in his great mercy for them, not because of their ability to keep that covenant in perfect standing, brings them back.
So going off what you're saying, I just want to know.
And I'll try to be brief again, but Zechariah 13 talks about that. Like God is going to bring back a strong remnant. Like there's going to be, I believe, biblically, a huge revival of Jewish believers as we approach the end times, whenever that is. I'm not saying we're in the end times now, or it's like, coming in 3 years or 300 years. Like, I don't know, but
Yeah.
but there's going to be a huge revival, and then Zechariah talks a lot about that, I believe. So there's still promises, I believe, to Israel that have yet been unfulfilled, even the non-believing Israel, that needs to be fulfilled. So anyway,
Yeah. Like she was saying, they have been cast out, like of the land, and then brought back to fulfill certain prophecies
right.
all throughout. So it's not like if they're just disobedient, then, oh, well, that's it, it's done.
Yeah. Well,
So,
they made the ultimate like rejection of Christ, like from like a Christian theological standpoint, like that was like the ultimate rejection,
right.
but
But God is all
God is he's
long-suffering.
long suffering and forgiving, and you can always turn back to Christ. And because even the Jews, believe in Messiah, right? It's just that we
Yeah.
believe that Jesus is that Messiah, and that he did come for the Jews, and he came for everybody.
Right. And I also feel like if they didn't reject him, then so many things that were supposed to happen wouldn't have happened, like the
For us, yeah.
crucifixion, and then also the coming, the end times. If they believed Jesus was the Messiah, none of that would have happened. So almost that was all
Yeah,
in
it's
God's
like
plan in a way,
it
if you could
is. I
say.
mean, it's God's sovereignty. It's like Romans 28, turning all things to the good of those who love him. It's taking, God is going to allow things to occur by free will, but and it's in his greater sovereign plan. Like he knows the end from the beginning,
Right.
so he can shape everything, to his glory.
Right.
Who here believes the state of Israel today has a biblical right to the land? If you could just give me a raise of hands. Okay. I have a question that I think will tie into what you're probably going to talk about. If you believe the modern state of Israel has a biblical right to the land, how do you reconcile the fact that the borders described in Genesis are much larger than the current state of Israel? Genesis 15:18 says, "To your descendants I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates."
Yes, we can actually reconcile it by looking at the rest of the context. So that would be specifically Genesis 19 to 21. We can start out there. In Genesis 19 to 21, actually, God specifies the tribes, the 10 tribes that make up the land of Canaan there. And that is the land that he is referencing. So that is and that is not limitless in when he referred to that. And next, we actually have, I understand that usually sometimes it can be mistakenly identified, the river of Egypt. That is, a lot of people confuse that with the Nile River, but actually, which is in the center of Egypt, but actually that's not so. The river of Egypt that is specifically referred to is actually in the south of Gaza, that empties into the Mediterranean, actually.
Okay, you want to pause there
So
real
essentially,
quick? That just ties into that's like the leftist argument of how, the whole Palestine issue, which That's another tough one. I mean, but it's like you get. I mean, that just ties into like the Iran war and like Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis and like all the different organizations that are out there, these terror organizations. But
It
that's just a
also
whole nother
ties
layer.
into it also ties into people who are upset with the Jews by saying like they have this plan politically and not this is the other thing like this people don't distinguish this properly, but the state of Israel is a nation, a country, just like every other country. So there are, and even as a larger people group with the diaspora,
Right.
they do not all just believe the same stuff. So just like how my government has this document called The Path to Persia that lists out all this crazy stuff it plans
Mm.
on doing in the Middle East, it came out of like the White House back in like 2009
Oh,
doesn't mean that like every person in the government believes in that document and I believe in that document and like you know what I'm
yeah,
saying? And
exactly.
so
That's
there's
just like a group.
right there so there is politically a group that has this thing called Greater Israel. Now there's lots of people in the government who are completely against that in Israel. But that what they're saying here, like how do you reconcile that the Bible says that they actually have more land? That also ties into that Greater Israel thing, like you were, or what you were saying on the left, like they say from the sea to the sea or whatever.
Yeah, from like the river to the sea, Palestine shall
Yeah.
be free. Or I don't even know I don't want to. I don't have the exact chant, but I know people that believe that. And it's yeah, that's a tough one because a lot of people on both sides. I think it's primarily been from the left, but people on the right, like on that side of the anti-Zionist Christian right, also kind of fall for that as well. But okay.
In that verse, Egypt is to be excluded from the border. So again, it's not limitless that time it's mentioned there. And finally, we can look to 1 Kings 4:24. For he had dominion over all the region west of the Euphrates, from Tiphsah to Gaza, over all the kings west of the Euphrates, and he had peace on all sides. So in that way, that can similarly be reconciled to the borders. Again, borders have changed over time, but it is similar.
So I think it's very interesting because we're given this layout, right? Israel has never had all of that land. Now, in parts, in different areas, different times in history, but never the full land. So to me, it seems like either God is a liar and this is not going to happen, or it's going to happen one day. And I don't know.
I'd like to interject on that. So actually, they came out of Egypt, they were in captivity, and then they also were in Babylonian captivity and they were let out. But in Joshua 21:43, they actually did possess all the land, and God said they did. And the Lord gave unto Israel all the land which he swore to give unto their fathers. And they possessed it, and they dwelt therein. And the Lord gave them rest round about according to all they swore unto their fathers. And there stood not a man of all their enemies before them. The Lord delivered all of their enemies into their hand. I think somebody else here actually already quoted 1 Kings 4. Was it one of you guys did? Yeah, you did. So that's more Solomon, right? He had control over the entire kingdom. And then also we see in Nehemiah 9:8, there was a prayer about all of this. So they've already inhabited the land. So it's not that the prophecy hasn't been fulfilled. The prophecy has already been fulfilled. And now we're under a new covenant with Christ. And now we have that covenant where it is fulfilled through Christ to all of the nations.
Yeah. I mean, I
think we
agree
have to
with
be
that
very clear
part.
about what we mean by fulfilled. Fulfilled is
I agree with that last statement about it is just through Christ ultimately now. But I think like this whole thing can be summarized in that way.
Yeah.
It's,
I just did you feel the attitude off of her though? I feel like she
I
didn't say
mean,
that
they're
very
all young
nicely.
and they're all very young, ladies. So I
Yeah.
don't know. They're,
Okay. Okay.
not the same thing as finished. And if looking at things from the Catholic perspective, the Second Vatican actually addresses this quite concisely, stating that God did not repent his gifts and that replacement theology is not the official teaching of the church.
Well, if we're going to get into replacement theology, I think that that's actually a derogatory term that's used to dispel people who don't hold a belief that was only created in the 1800s moving
yeah. I
forward.
mean, there
The
is an
original church
attitude,
fathers.
Megan. That's funny. There is a bit of an attitude.
I know.
Yeah.
What's so funny is like they're saying that it's not a Catholic teaching, but I found writings that
Yeah.
espouse this type of thing, but I think they might be confusing it with like what you were saying with like the spiritual, like we are the church, you know, like
Yeah.
that type of thing, and they're conflating it into this whole, you know, because nowadays people just make everything black and white.
That's
So,
true.
you know, Russia is bad. When
Yeah.
people say something about like Russia or China or any other country, it's just like, oh, Russia's doing this. Oh, China's doing that. Oh, you know,
Yeah. It's like
whatever.
Coke or
And
Pepsi, like people
yeah,
have to pick a side,
and
you know?
they don't take in any nuance of other
Right.
countries or other people or people's worldviews, like, you know what I'm saying? And so they're taking this whole just a basic Christian view and they're like
Yeah.
extrapolating it into this black and white
They're
thing.
way over and they're overcomplicating it. It's like, it's like they're both wrong pretty much. I mean, I mean, I don't mean everything they're saying is wrong, but like ultimately it's just like the whole thing can be just summarized in that there are still, I believe, like land promises to Israel. It's still like undeniable that Israel is at the center of every conflict, so to speak, in the world. It's like it's cosmic or biblical. It's like everything centers around, do you hate Israel or do you love Israel? Are you, pro-Jewish or anti-Jewish from like both sides of the extreme? But
Well,
if
and
we,
also, and like, how on earth can the stuff in Revelation happen if there is no Israel there?
yeah, I mean, it has to. But
Right.
I guess like, yeah, it's like it's simple, but it's complex at the same time. I think like politically it's complex, and whether like they have a right to exist or not, we can debate all of those things, which I do believe, like you, that they do have a right, as a modern nation, as an ally, to exist. Like I've become a lot more pro-Israel in a sense, politically speaking, and then but then I
Well, a lot of
separate
people are
that.
becoming more pro-Israel. I have some friends that are like, I never really even gave any thought to any of this, but now that there's these rabid, like, you can't say anything without people calling you like, oh, you're getting $7,000. Oh, you're getting paid by Netanyahu. You're
Getting
Israel
your
shill.
Mossad, you're a Mossad
Yeah.
agent.
Yeah. Or Fed
Yeah,
slop or whatever. And so it's
yeah,
like, because these people who are being lied to and misled about history, you know, like they think Stalin was Jewish now, and like it's
right.
so
Well,
bizarre.
it just all of those arguments just go too far on many sides, and it's like I
And
know
so
even
now
like a
people are like, well, I never thought about it, but since you guys are being so crazy, I'm like completely
right,
going to be for them, you know? And then some
right.
people are, you know, super against them, and then some people just really don't care
Well,
all that much.
it's highly nuanced, and it's like I even know like the people, like when I would do a lot of live streams on my channel, like they heard me say, I'm more pro-Israel. Like it's like that's like a huge topic because I'm more pro-Israel politically, with having them as an ally, being a bulwark against Islam in the Middle East, and like, there's like a whole thing there, and then having the historical context of historically being the people of that land. Although then you get into the whole Ashkenazi debate, and so like I understand like all, like, I've heard all these different sides of it, but it's
Yeah,
just
but
a
that
highly nuanced.
Ashkenazi debate is like false too, because the conspiracy theorists aren't very good researchers. I've learned as a lifelong conspiracy
Right,
person my
right.
entire life, basically. I have learned over time that they're not very good researchers, and also they like will make things up and lie, and then that gets spread. So somebody might not be intentionally lying to you. They're just spreading something somebody already made up as a
Yeah.
lie, like a document or whatever.
Well, there's so
But
much of that like
yeah, the
information
Ashkenazi
propaganda, and
thing is a propaganda that the Jews came from this tribe, this Khazarian tribe in the steppe, like in the 7th century, that was totally wiped out. If you know anything about history, that tribe, they were in between Christians and Jews, and so, or not Jews, they were in between Christians and Muslims. So to not take any sides and get swept in, they converted to Judaism, And then eventually they were completely wiped out by like hordes, like Mongolian hordes. And then
Right.
what was left of them got absorbed into the other steppe tribes around them. There is
Right.
no record in any historic record of any kind of them actually migrating to, that part of Western Europe where the Ashkenazis would be in, which is
Right.
like Germany or whatever.
I mean, that's
And
even more than like I have like see even more than I've looked into it on that aspect of
yeah,
it
and
because
then also there's all this genealogy now,
right,
and they actually have like, so when a Jewish person does their genealogy, they will be linked to an ancestor. They'll be like, it's like a number of a person that they dug up, at some point in time through like archaeology and stuff
right,
in the Levant, and they'll be like, this is a 3,000-year-old ancestor of yours
right.
that existed, and its number is blah 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 that you're related to and stuff. They do have, like, of course, some, German and Western European
Well, there was
DNA in
because of
them,
the
but it's not very
diaspora
much.
too.
They come from the Levant in the genetics. That's what it shows. So Levant.
Oh, okay. So
So
they did, but they were through the diaspora, they were taken abroad into Europe
yeah, and so they have,
in different parts of like Rome and wherever.
yeah, so but they are mostly of Levant DNA.
Right.
Like through
Okay.
DNA, we
Yeah.
have that
That's
knowledge now.
that makes sense. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, but it's like what I want people to understand is like I can like Israel as a political ally and relate more to their mindset or their culture as a more of a secular democracy like America, and they can be an ally and I can like them, but I can understand that spiritually I have to be in Christ in order to be saved. And those are ultimately the promises that I've been given in Christ, while there still yet remains a fulfillment to the people of Israel to be saved and to return to accept Jesus as their savior ultimately.
Yeah, but that, like, Chinese people need that.
Everyone needs that. Yeah.
Everyone needs that. So I don't know why we have to focus so much on like one group. It's kind of
Well,
weird,
it is
and then we put
strange.
all
Yeah.
this stuff on them that'll, like, there are Jewish people, even Jewish rabbis that speak out about the state of Israel. There's Jews that don't think that, that
There
are
are.
not
Yeah.
Zionists. You know what I
There's
mean?
yeah,
They're
there definitely.
anti-Zionist Jews. And so,
That's
and
right.
then there's Jews that are against all the wars that America is committing. I haven't agreed with the wars and the weird stuff that our government is doing, like all over the
Yeah.
world,
Well,
my entire life, basically.
I'm not an isolationist, but like I understand the forever wars. Like you don't want the forever wars, you don't want like just constantly it seems like we're at warfare
Yeah, I'm
somewhere.
not an
But
isolationist either. I think we should have a very strong Western Hemisphere, and I think we
yeah,
should have a strong presence in key locations around the globe. Like, I'm not against that. I'm
right,
just against the willing, the underhanded. No country can ever do good. Like, if they want to trade with
right.
somebody and that's making their economy good, we got to squash them to the ground. They're our enemies now, and it's like that's not Christian. Like, why would we want everyone to just remain poor and subjugate? You know what I'm saying? Like, they should be able to grow and live and trade with people, and you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I'm just kind of against that sort of a thing. But I do want us to remain like number one,
Yeah,
and we can
me
remain
too.
number
And
one without being mean to everybody else,
right, and that's the
you
goal,
know?
and that should be the goal. I mean, nations and governments do some very evil things, like
Right.
every nation and every government does, but
Yes.
ultimately, I think we can like safely say that our nation is the best in many ways, and Western society is the best in every way, in my opinion, because ultimately, we share those same founding principles of like freedom and belief in God and belief in like the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and then believing in Jesus for Christians. And so we share like the same ideals and the same principles in the West, and really most strongly in America. So I'd like to protect that. I think I want
Yeah.
that to be the dominant force. in the world, rather than like Islam, like a jihadi kind of perspective.
But I
So
don't think that it's wise or very like Christian to do it in such a demeaning way where we treat other countries
right,
so
I
derogatory.
agree.
Because
Yeah,
then those people have pride in themselves too. And so you're
right,
crushing that pride, that spirit, you're hurting people when you
right,
do that. And so I don't like that as a Christian, and I've always been, this about me, I've always been super into Russia and Eastern Europe, like their history going all the way back to like the Middle Ages, I know very well.
right.
And
Well,
so
yeah,
like
there's some great cultures around the world. Like even in
yeah,
like Iran, like it before like all the stuff that's happened, and especially before 1979, before the Ayatollahs came in, it's like an incredible place, to be.
yeah,
But
it's
um,
fascinating.
and a lot of nations are that way. So yeah,
And
no,
I
I
feel
totally
like
agree.
people look at Russia just as like what happened to them for a short amount of time where they fell under communism and they went in a really bad way. But they're in a civilization that has existed for like 1,000 years, going
Yeah,
back into history. And they just had this one blip with communism. And now it's like, they'll never be forgiven. They're just like the most evil people in the world. You know what I mean? So,
right. No, we need
um,
to like establish trade with them if we can, and like bring them in as like an ally.
yeah.
If it were possible, I don't know if that'll ever happen, but that would be amazing.
Okay, I have another video I want to show you so we can like move on from this.
Okay,
Have you ever heard of the guy James Lindsay?
I have not heard of them.
So this is a really weird thing for me because I actually really, really like James Lindsay, but then he's been being really, really weird lately
Yeah,
where so he was the guy who exposed all the woke stuff in the schools and everything. And he was going around, he was speaking at like parent conferences with parents, and he was telling everybody at the woke, and he really researched it and he tracked it all down to like
right.
all the levels of it. And he has a YouTube channel, but he also like has been around like all over the place speaking, and he's been on a lot of podcasts, et
Okay.
cetera, et cetera. And I've always really admired his work, and I really admire the way his mind thinks. But
Yeah,
then he got into like sort of this online beef with the far right, or what's considered the far right. Like, do you know who Orrin McIntyre is?
I've heard that name.
Yeah, so he has a show with the Blaze,
Okay.
and
Yeah, I know the place.
he's really philosophical, so like on the right we have a lot of thinkers that are really into philosophy, and they think about things and stuff like that. And so they are just they'll have everybody on their show that they talk to. They don't always necessarily agree with them. They're just trying to
Right.
understand what they believe and think about what they believe. And like they read a lot of books and they read a lot of Greek stuff. So like on their show, they'll go over like it's just there's this portion of the right. And Orrin McIntyre has never been in any possible way like not right. You know what I mean? But now
Okay.
James Lindsay and his little group, because he has a whole group of followers, got mad at him and his group and Orrin McIntyre's group for some reason. And he's the one who created this term woke right to start attacking all these people that he doesn't like on the right. And James Lindsay was never on the right. He's actually like was a leftist, is an atheist, won't tell us what he believes religiously because he'll never tell anybody now. And he goes around harassing Orrin and saying that's not
Mm,
his real name. And so
yeah.
they'll say Orrin like he'll be on a show talking about Orrin McIntyre, and he'll go, that's not his real name. Like after he
Oh,
says
weird.
Orrin McIntyre.
And who was
Yeah.
this guy? Who was this guy that makes fun of him?
His name is James Lindsay. He's not making
James
fun of him.
Lindsay.
He's saying he's a dangerous, like his ideology is dangerous. And
Oh,
all these
okay.
people on the far right are actually woke, and they're like, doing all this crazy stuff, and they're
Wow.
playing identity
So it's like
politics.
the woke right type stuff that he's
Yeah,
saying they are.
he came up with that. He's
Oh,
the one who
okay.
came up with that term. And then he'll say like
Doesn't seem like a good term. Like it's not helpful to our side, I feel like.
yeah, but that he made it up to because he doesn't like these people because he got into
Right.
beef with them. He is a post he is what he calls himself a classical liberal, even though nobody is a classical liberal nowadays.
Right. Yeah.
And then he calls Orrin and all these other people post-liberalists because Orrin will make the case that our constitution was made for a constitution is a word that actually means something like what you're constituted of, like
Yeah.
and so he said that the Constitution was made for a specific people,
Oh,
majority
okay.
like white,
Oh,
European
man.
with a high
Okay.
trust society and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
as we move farther and farther away from that, it gets
Ooh.
harder for the Constitution to work
So what is
properly.
he proposing we change? Because like those are the founding ideals,
He
the
doesn't want to change
principles.
anything. He wants
Okay,
us
good.
to remove the migrants. Like stop
Oh,
importing,
oh, okay.
illegal
So that's
immigrants,
like,
stop and
right,
yeah, like, because he's saying like the more that our society continues to get other cultures put into it that aren't assimilating, the harder and harder our constitution will have to work properly.
right. I
Um,
mean, I get the underlying thought of that. I mean,
right. And he has no power to change anything. It's a philosophy.
it's
These
just
guys
his,
think
yeah,
about philosophy, right? And
yeah,
then he'll say things to people like, they're like, we just got to follow the Constitution. And then, because he makes people think, he'll be like, well, when should we go back to what part of the Constitution? Because we don't have the same Constitution as we did in like 1780 because women weren't, we didn't have all these amendments and stuff. So it's
right.
like the Constitution has changed. So which Constitution are you
Well,
talking
I
about?
mean, that has to include the amendments. That's what the amendments are for, so we can make those
Right.
necessary changes to keep relevant
But
with,
he's pointing out like people's hypocrisy when they say
right.
we are exactly like the founding fathers when we're not, because they had a completely different, the
Yeah,
Constitution wasn't the same as it is now because we've added amendments and all that stuff.
right.
So, and he's not saying we should do away with the Constitution. These are just
Yeah.
higher thinkers
So
on the
is he
right who
using that to say to get rid of all immigrants or illegal immigrants or what?
illegal immigrants and then stop bringing
New
immigrants
immigrants.
to the country. Like we need to have a moratorium.
Like a moratorium. Okay.
Yeah, so that people have
I mean,
time to
that's not
assimilate and
too
you know what I
far
mean?
from it's not too far from like MAGA Rubio kind of, but not as
That's
maybe
what
they're more
most people on
extreme.
the far right believe. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's what most people on the far right believe. But James Lindsay is saying like that's playing identity politics now, so it's woke. Okay? Because woke is like
It's not
Marxist.
woke. It's just it's like if you go to it depends how far you go with it, it can become dangerous. But if it's a moratorium or a reclaiming our identity and our culture as a nation, like I'm for that. That's
I
good.
only know a few people that have shows, and I'm not going to name them because I don't want to draw like, to speak bad about people, but I only know of like two actual people that actually say they want to get rid of everybody of a different race than white.
Yeah,
And
that would be that would be like the fascist right that I was
right, yeah, they
referring
are.
to.
Like to me, they seem very like that way. But
Yeah,
in
and that's what I mean by it's dangerous because it's
But they
like,
don't have
okay,
any power, like, nobody's listening to them, you know what I mean?
right.
Like, they're not gonna achieve
But
that, like
on some levels it's true though too. So that's what makes it dangerous is that like we do need to preserve like the Christian way of life, like the European Western way of life, because that's ultimately rooted in like biblical principles, which we're for.
right.
And if you have 2 million hardcore Muslim immigrants come in, you get Britain, with like all the problems that they're having there. So it's a real problem,
Right.
but it's just the response to it has to be
Appropriate.
appropriate and balanced. Yeah.
The
Otherwise,
thing
you
is,
get too far to the other side. So I'm always
yeah.
looking for the balance, the checks and balances.
So my point was that this James Lindsay guy, I have actually really liked his work, but as of recently, I'm sort of a little upset with him because he's like labeling a lot of people that I like that I don't consider woke at all, knowing I learned all this woke stuff from him as being woke, and I feel like he's using it to
Yeah,
attack people he doesn't like, and
yeah,
he's
I'm sure he
aligned
is.
himself with the neocons now, like Ted
Yeah,
Cruz, and then he goes over to James Lindsay went over to Israel and did the whole wall thing and all that. So I was like, what is going on with him? Because I feel like I don't know. There's something like weird, I feel like, but
mm,
who knows? So
yeah,
this is his video, okay? It's called, what is it called? Uh, are are Jews really God's chosen people? Okay. And you're gonna
okay.
find this really interesting, I feel like.
I mean,
So
that sounds like a Steven Anderson title.
yeah, but he's not. He's for the Jews.
Oh,
Like,
okay.
yeah, he's for
Okay.
the Jews and he hates
I
like
just
what
have
he
PTSD from all that still, so it like
I
it
know.
hits me sometimes.
I know. So this guy's trying to defend the Jews with this
Okay,
video, okay?
okay.
Okay.
Everyone, it's James Lindsay. You are listening to New Discourses Bullets, where I give a short bullet point like summary of a single topic from woke that we need to understand so we can beat it. This topic is coming from the woke right. It is not actually a topic relevant to woke specifically. It is a narrative that is driven by bad actors on the woke right. And it kind of gets driven in two different ways. That narrative has to do with this question: are the Jews God's chosen people? One way is to just hold this against the Jews as though Jews see themselves as somehow special, greater than everyone else, in a kind of sarcastic, negging sort of way, is how the narrative is pushed. God's chosen people this, God's chosen people that, and then they juxtapose that against something bad or gross or nasty or whatever to try to insult that idea. And some others actually push a different line, that the church has replaced Israel, and therefore that Catholics or Christians are God's chosen people now, and specifically not Jews. And there's
Right.
a ton to unpack. Getting into that, I have to offer a disclaimer.
Do you want me to pause it?
Yeah, I mean, that's just what we talked about so far, right? Like with replacement theology is one of the views.
Right. But he's like
He's
saying,
going to refute all that, I bet, right?
yeah, he's like not for replacement theology.
Yeah.
Disclaimer's
Okay.
not really my style, but I do want to be accurate and sensitive. I am
But I feel like he says some weird stuff because he's trying to interpret what the Jews believe, and I don't know if he necessarily I
He
just want to
knows.
get your opinion on it.
Yeah.
going to, as we might say, goy-splain this. I am not Jewish. I am a Gentile, as it were. I am outside of their tradition. I am outside of their thought. I am not the best person to explain this. I am new to these explanations, but I feel like it needs to be said, and it needs to be said by somebody who is outside of this so that it can be heard. And so there's actually a lot going on. Is what does this chosen people mean? What have they been chosen to do? And how are they chosen are kind of all questions aside from those two narratives. And so, like I said, there's a ton going on here. So the first thing is, how do the Jews see themselves as chosen if they do? So a lot of Jews do understand themselves as God's chosen people, but what they see themselves as being chosen for, and I'll come back to this in more detail, is a responsibility. And it is not that they're selected as the elect greater than people of the world. It is that they've been given a special task or
You
responsibility.
could pause it there. I think like what he's talking about is probably what most, like a lot of Jews today believe it, as far as like you're a modern or like a Reformed Jew. But Orthodoxy, it actually means being chosen of God, right? To be elect of God. And like in the sense that the Jews were the apple of God's eye under the Old Testament. But okay, I just wanted to clarify that if you want to.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. Like that's what so what I think he does talk about that too.
Okay.
That's a different kind of narrative to what the implication of the woke right narrative against them is. So that's one thing. Like I said, I'll develop that. The second thing is, how do they see themselves as having been chosen? And the funny thing is, while this isn't specifically in the Torah or in the Hebrew Bible overall, it is actually a pretty standard rabbinical understanding from a midrashic commentary on Deuteronomy called the Sifrei Devarim, which explains that in fact the Jews were not the first people, or Israel, I should say, was not the first people chosen by God to do this responsibility. They were the people who said yes. God asked other people, "Will you keep these laws?" This
Okay, so what
Okay,
do you think
interesting.
about that?
So that's the midrash, like the commentary on the rabbinic commentary on the Talmud and like things like that, which is like scholarly rabbinic commentary on the Old Testament or on the Torah. But in terms of Deuteronomy, I mean, yeah, what he's saying isn't inaccurate. He's right in that this is what a lot of Jews believe today, who are like reformed, what most Jews probably do believe. But biblically, it's not that. Like Deuteronomy never says that God went to other nations and asked them to, keep the law, and they rejected God, and then he went to
Yeah, I
Israel.
never heard
That's
of that
that's
before. I was like,
completely false.
what?
Yeah. So
Okay.
biblically, it's false, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Talmud says that, basically, or the Midrash, which is, I
Okay.
think one's like the verbal traditions of the scribes and the like the Pharisees and the Jews, and then one's like the written commentary.
Okay. I highly doubt religious Jewish people, like even ultra religious ones, sometimes don't all believe the same thing. So
They
maybe
don't.
there's different
There's
interpretations. I
different
just had never heard of
branches
this
because
before.
you've got like your ultra Orthodox Jews, like in Israel, you'll see them with like the tefillin, and like they're
Yeah.
wearing like the garbs, and and they're probably more traditionalist toward what the Torah might actually teach, versus well, a lot of them probably believe in the Talmud and the rabbinic traditions too. But yeah, to answer that is, there are different groups and belief systems within.
Is at least according to this commentary, which is based off of a line in Deuteronomy 33. The Lord came from Sinai, and he shone forth from Seir unto them. He appeared from Mount Paran, which this midrash understands them. This midrashic, I should say, commentary understands that line to represent that God went before other people as well. And then drawing off of different statements made through Genesis and Exodus, they conclude, for example, that God must have approached the descendants of Esau, who did not want to give up murder. So he approached them in theory on this commentary based on that line in Deuteronomy 33. And then
This is
this is the
Megan.
general understanding.
This is
Yes.
like the tradition of the rabbis, like what Jesus talked about when he was rebuking the Pharisees, because they were making up their own traditions about the scriptures, and they would teach it as though this is the truth and this is like the authority. So this is what, like, the things he's quoting are from our text like that, and it's creating traditions using a few skimpy verses to jump to conclusions, and it's just all false, basically.
Okay.
Like,
And the
yeah.
Well, there's some other points in here that I want to ask you about because I don't know if this is true or not.
the
Okay.
Edomites asked, well, what do you want from us if we're going to be, in this covenant with you? And he says, no murdering. And they say, no. And then he approached the Ammonites and the Moabites, and they didn't want to give up adultery and sexual immorality. And he approaches the Ishmaelites, I should say, and they don't want to give up stealing and being wild. And these are all based off of comments from Genesis about how they described their ways of life in these different countries, by the way, and goes to other nations and so on. And the difference is that in Exodus, specifically Exodus 24, when the Israelites are approached by God with this deal, which is to keep the commandments, they reply, we will do it, and we will hear the details later. So they agree to the proposition.
Okay, so that's not
No.
in the Bible,
No,
right?
none of that is. And what's interesting is this guy, so I don't know his name, I keep forgetting, but
James Lindsay.
James Lindsay. So James Lindsay, he's not inaccurate in what he's saying. Like, he's correctly describing what a large segment of Jews living in Israel or around the world today probably do believe, if they're religious. And again, I'm not a Jew, so I might be, take some of it with a grain of salt, but like there's like Reformed Jews, which is probably the majority of the religious among Jews. Then you've got like your Orthodox and other groups.
Is Reformed when we say Reformed Baptist and stuff like that?
I mean, well, our Reformation is rooted in like the Protestant Reformation, and
No, I mean there's like a group of Baptists called the Reformed
that would,
Baptists.
yeah. So they're like Calvinist,
Okay.
Calvinist Baptists. But when they say Reformed Jews, it's like a more modern. A lot of it is mystic. It goes into Kabbalah and like the Talmud, and there's different aspects of it. So what he's describing, he's not wrong in that a lot of Jews do believe those things, but none of that appears in the Bible.
Okay.
At least I should say practicing Jews, because probably the majority of Jews are secular. You know, they're just ethnically or culturally you know, you know what I mean? Like there's different segments of that also.
Yeah. But like even if they're not secular, they still believe that them as a tribe were God's
Yeah.
chosen people, right? Like they
I
sort
mean,
of
it
have this
depends. So
mythos, right?
there's like atheist Jews also.
Oh, that's
So
right.
yeah,
So
so it just
they
depends.
wouldn't believe that because
They
that wouldn't
wouldn't
make
believe.
sense.
Yeah, but they
Like,
cling on to the culture and the stories and what, the heritage and the history of it, the family traditions, ethnicity, it's kind of like it's a unique thing, so it's hard to describe it, but almost like a Christian who grew up a Christian but isn't really a believer in a way,
okay.
you know. But it's richer and deeper. It goes deeper than that, though. But yeah, so a lot of them do believe these things are coming from commentary on the Torah, but it's not in the actual Torah or in the Deuteronomy or in the books of the law.
Yeah, he's making this video though to
Yeah,
to make fun of the woke to talk derogatory about the what he calls the woke right?
right.
So he's trying to explain and so let's just listen a little bit more because
Yep.
he says something about Esau
Okay.
that I was really confused about.
that they agree to the covenant without even having to know what's in it. They say this is in our best interest. They accept the
Mm.
contract on faith. So in that sense, they are chosen, but they are chosen because they chose to be chosen and to step into a relationship in faith. So there was a trust element there. So this is very different than this idea that God came down from on high and said, "You are my people." That'll be that. Now, of course, if you read in Genesis 12, that's actually how Genesis 12 starts. This is where God comes out and talks to Abraham. And the famous part is, "I'll bless the people who bless you and curse the people who curse you." So this is, like I said, not specifically in the Torah, but this is a standard understanding
See?
among Jews. And the question here
Yeah.
for this discussion is not necessarily what is the exact exegetical truth. The question is, how do Jews understand themselves as so-called God's chosen people? And they see themselves as the people who said yes in faith to a covenant, which required of them certain things. They said, yes, we will do the hard things you're asking, even without knowing what they are, and entered into the covenant on those terms, which took place at Sinai eventually. Okay, so this explains what the Jewish view of their chosenness is. They don't see themselves as an exalted elect above humanity. They see themselves as people who accepted a particular responsibility and did so in faith after others had possibly rejected it, based on this at least particular commentary. Regardless of if that's right or not, the Jews see themselves as people who have accepted a responsibility. So what is that responsibility? Their responsibility is to keep the commandments, which are the 613 mitzvot. You've heard of the 10 commandments. That's the Decalogue. That's 10 of the 613 mitzvot or commandments that God gave them. So God says, if you basically want to have a good, successful life in society, follow these rules. That's the mitzvot. That's the commandments. And they said, we'll do it. And the deal is that it's a covenant. So the deal is you do your part, I do my part. And that goes both ways. So if the people do their part and keep the covenant, then God will bless them as people who kept the covenant. So the idea is that the Jews have accepted the responsibility of keeping these particular commandments and rules to uphold what amounts to the introduction of ethics into the world. They said, we will voluntarily be ethical people. We will voluntarily do these good deeds. We will voluntarily uphold these commandments and laws, whether it's do not murder, do not steal, etc., or whether it's more particular things like kosher laws for dietary consumption.
So
What do you
yeah, I
think
mean,
about what do you think about that? Because I know by just studying history that there were other Levant, how do you say it? I was saying it right earlier,
yeah, you
but
were Levant.
of that area that
Yeah,
also had laws and rules and stuff like the Hittites. Like a lot of people don't know
right.
about them, but there you can actually learn about the Hittites. There's a lot
Is
of
there like a Hammurabi
yeah,
stone or something?
there's archaeological evidence about them that they had, laws and rule
Right.
society just like everybody else. And so I don't know if like they were the only people to
Like
do
have
that. It's just
laws.
that they
Well,
brought
they had,
in specific like they you know what I mean? Like it was
yeah,
codified and put down and like God said, like this is the morality that we follow, right?
right. I mean, it all goes back to Genesis 12 and Abraham though, where Like it does say, like God appeared unto Abraham, like it was specifically like he was chosen, and he says, "He who blesses your seed," right? So, like the way I see the Bible, everything was for the creation of the nation of Israel in the beginning, because Jesus would come out of the nation of Israel, or the Messiah would, right? As the
Yeah,
son of
all the way
David.
even back to the very beginning where it's your seed shall crush his head,
Right. Exactly.
to
Crush the
Eve.
head of the serpent.
Yeah.
So it all goes back to that seed, which is Christ. So I think, see, the chosen people is Christ. Like the chosen is ultimately Christ. So it's Christ himself, and then those who are in Christ become the seed ultimately. But if you're looking at it at like a really inside, like theological
I feel like
level,
they were chosen to bring forth Jesus's lineage.
yeah, they were
To make
that and the law. Like they were entrusted. It says like in the Bible that the Jews were entrusted with the oracles of God,
Yeah,
which
like the scripture.
the
All the
scriptures.
scripture that we have comes from Jewish people, even the New
Right.
Testament.
Now, what this guy was saying, and what maybe some Jews do believe, is it's interesting. Like it's a voluntary entering into covenant with that God in order to do good or to establish morality, and do. It's not like everything he was saying is wrong, because that's how these like false doctrines or false teachings spread, is that there's a modicum of truth, but then you bring in other things, like they
Well, I
went
think
to
it's
other
like
nations
there's
first.
an
And
actual word for their thinking. I can't think of it as like tulaba or something, where they have a moral responsibility to do good in the world. Like Jews have
right.
this, they're taught this from a young age. Um,
Right. And that's
so
good. I mean, that's the
yeah.
law. Like that's like we should do good. And so there is like some it's like it's interesting to hear some of it, because I
Well,
can see
that's
like
why I think it's
shades of
important
truth
to
in it.
Yeah, that's why I think it's important to understand people's worldviews. So I do that a lot on my channel where I
Right.
try not to just, this country is the ultimate enemy and everyone there is this specific way. And I try to bring in like the nuance and stuff. That's why I thought it was interesting to hear about this. And also it's interesting because there's this whole woke right element that he's bringing into this whole,
Right. So how does it connect the woke right
because he says that the
to
woke right will and it's not just the woke right that's done this all throughout his, or what he calls the woke right that's done this throughout history, but he's saying like they will use they will say Jews hold over the Gentiles the idea that they were the chosen people, as if they're like haughty over all of us, like we're the chosen ones, and then people will throw that back at their face in like a derogatory way. So he's
right?
trying to explain why.
They don't see it that way themselves.
Yeah, but I think some
Right.
of them do, because I've seen some of them say stuff like that.
I
You know
mean,
what I
it's
mean?
like human nature with everybody. Like
Right. Like it's not
this is
like
why
the entire
nuances.
group of not like, that's what I'm saying. It's not like the entire, but there are some that are a little like just
Yeah.
a little more ornery or
But
whatever.
biblically speaking, if you're coming from a Christian perspective, it's that, from the very beginning, the promise was to the seed, which is Christ. And it was, Israel was created so that we could have a nation of laws and an example to the other nations, to be separate and holy from like the abomination of all the surrounding nations and all the pagan stuff they were doing, right?
Right.
So there was like reasons for the establishment of Israel, and foremost being that the lineage of Christ, like you said, had to be established so that the Savior could come, right, and save the whole world, including
Right.
the Jew and the
And then
Gentile and
therefore
everybody.
all the nations are blessed, right?
Exactly, through Abraham, which God chose. So it's like, you know,
Yeah.
that's the
Well,
biblical
okay, we don't
angle.
have to listen to any more of this, but I think at one point he says something about that the Jews believe that Jacob is the Jews and that Esau is the Gentiles or the
Uh,
nations. Have you ever heard of that before?
um, I mean, it sounds kind of familiar, but it
I had
reminds
never
me of
heard of
like,
heard of it
yeah, I
because
don't think so. Yeah.
it said God remember in the Bible where it says Jacob I have loved and Esau
And
I've
Esau
hated.
hated, yeah. So
Okay,
they see
so
that, but I don't see there's no biblical connection with Esau and Gentiles, though. That's a stretch for
that's
sure.
what I was wondering
Is that the
because
woke
I
right was saying that, or this guy was saying
no,
that?
he says this is what the Jews believe.
Okay, okay,
And I found a article on it from Torah.com
right.
where Israel and Edom, they say that Edom created the Edomites, which then somehow became like the Romans. And that, so then therefore, early
Yeah.
Christian readings of Jacob and Esau metaphor, and they like use Paul to equate, like, I don't
I
know,
mean,
it's really weird.
The
Um,
Edomites came from Esau, but they were
right.
like half Jew and half Gentile. So, I mean, you could trace all the lineage from, all the nations and all that, but yeah, that stuff gets complex too, and it
Well,
gets a little
that's a
bit weird.
talking point now on the right where they're saying, well, not just the right, but the antis, like let's just call them the antis, where
Yeah,
they're now saying, like, oh, they say that we're Esau, and they say
right,
that God hates Esau. And
right.
so they're saying, like, then they're saying, like, all Jews say that God hates us because we're Gentiles. And I'm like, what? Where is this coming from?
No, that's
And
wild. Yeah,
so
no, there's no
the
basis for it.
yeah, the whole thing is crazy. Like, there's
Yeah,
so much going on. But I did have a couple of, so this is some other, so this was restorationism. We talked about that earlier. This was what it was called. Restorationism is the pre-20th century Christian belief that the Jewish people would return physically to Palestine, a
mm,
concept that later evolved into Christian Zionism.
yeah,
So
that makes sense. Yeah,
that
I've heard
was,
a little bit about that.
yeah, that was going on before that.
Right. Yeah, because there's a
And
whole movement that led to the formation of Israel. It's like a
right.
movement of, yeah, migrants and settlers and
And here's another verse where it's talking about in Genesis to Abram that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the
right.
stars of heaven and as the
That's
sand
that
which is
seed.
upon the. Yeah.
Right. That's that seed one that ties back to Galatians 3:16, where it says, and he says to thy seed, singular, not to seeds, as in plural, but that seed being Christ. So
Okay.
it ties back to that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So
But
I
it
have another, let me pull it up, where it mentions seed a bunch of times.
Yeah,
Um,
so that seed is usually going to be the Christ foremost, and then those who are then also believers, because believers are elect of Christ or beget begot by Christ. Like when we're born again, we're begotten of Christ, so we become like little seeds, and He's like the seed. But yeah,
Other passages that mention seed, Deuteronomy 1:10, the Lord your God hath multiplied you, and behold, ye are this day as the stars of heaven for multitude. So right there, it says that they're as big as the stars in the heaven, like in Deuteronomy.
right. So are you referring to those are the people of Israel, or those are the
Well, I
believers?
believe in Deuteronomy, they're talking to Israel, right?
They are. So yeah, they are, and they're talking to the nations. In context, that would be, yeah, about the nation.
Yeah, so they're already saying to them, God hath multiplied you, and behold, ye are this day as the stars of heaven in multitude.
Wow. So you're saying in a way that was fulfilled then.
Yeah, like I never noticed that before
Right.
because
That's
I always
interesting.
read the other one that we just read as like all the people, like you can't count the stars, they're so innumerable, right? So I
Right.
was imagining
But there
it as
would have
all the.
been millions of Israelites and Judites and all the tribes, so
Yes,
all
so
coming from the one man Abraham.
they had gotten very big at this point.
Yeah. No, it's
People don't
interesting.
think about that a
And
lot.
I kind of, it's like you read the Bible over and over, but you gloss over certain things, and it's when the Spirit wants to reveal a verse, He does.
Yeah. And then here's Genesis 15:5, and he brought him forth abroad and said, look now toward heaven and tell the stars if thou be able to number them. And he said unto them, so shall thy seed be.
Right. So,
And
and that's where it's like dual use, It's like, so on one level, like seed is talking about he's going to be a large people, a multitude, a nation, and all the nations come from Abraham. Ultimately, like a lot of, you get Judaism and Christianity, all of the, like the Abraham faiths. But
well, the
on the
thing is too, is like the Bible has it's so, what is the word?
multi-layered,
Yeah,
yeah, or
multifaceted,
multifaceted, yeah.
where it can mean one thing as God is actually speaking to Abraham, and then it can mean like another thing for in the future.
Exactly. But ultimately, it's saying how Paul concludes it all in the New Testament is that that seed is ultimately Christ. But that doesn't mean God doesn't have a plan for, to created a plan to create the nation of Israel and a future plan for the nation of Israel to be, part of the multitude of nations.
Okay, and then I know that you wanted to talk a little bit about Charlie Kirk. Did you still want to do that?
That maybe on another time. That'll
You
be
want to have
because I
another
know,
show? We can talk about more of this
yeah.
Charlie
It,
Kirk and then fracturing after. You want to do
Yeah,
that?
we could do yeah, we can do that sometime. We'll see what develops. Like what kind of triggered it for me was with the whole Tyler Robinson the bullet, issue. But yeah, we could definitely save that for another time. That would be a good one.
Okay, I feel like we really went over a lot. That was I a lot that we accomplished, I feel like. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, awesome. It was really good catching up and talking to you. There's so many rabbit holes of, different facets, like you mentioned, that we could explore on so many different topics. But yeah, I mean, for me, it just comes down to put your faith in Christ. That's ultimately the seed. But we love the Jewish people. We love like the Muslim people. Like we love everybody. We want everybody to get closer to God and get saved. And
Yes. Yes.
so that's
Praise
ultimately the
God.
goal.
Yes.
Yeah.
I I just don't feel like I want Israel to exist because they do, and I feel like there is a biblical aspect to everything like we talked about. I just don't qualify my Christianity with something else. You know what I
Like
mean?
I'm a Christian Zionist or I'm a Christian anti-Zionist.
Right, like I
Yeah,
feel like that's odd, you know?
right.
So that's sort of
I
how I
agree.
feel about the whole thing. But okay, well, it was great talking to you, and I would love to have you back soon.
Yeah, that would be
Okay.
cool.
Okay, thank you for stopping by.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. Great talking to you.
Okay, bye.
Bye, everyone.